Chapter 1580. Subconsciously, he wanted to correct him. However, on second thought, he realized that it was indeed inappropriate for Shin Nyenma to address him as father in his current state. Nyenma, I am your father. Do you want to see your mother? Yes. If you want to see your mother, then listen to father obediently and do as father instructs. I will listen to you, father. But, father, you look like my older brother. Father, when Nyenma is born, can you play with me like this? Shin Nyenma suddenly became excited. Since he had his own consciousness, he had always been with his father. He had only seen children running on the street, but he had never played with them. Children always like to play with people of the same age, and Shin Nyenma was no exception. He felt that his father looked more amiable. Shinjioli was speechless. His eyes flashed slightly, and he slowly said, Nyenma, do you want to play with children of the same age? Shin Nyenma nodded. Yes. Shinjioli smiled slightly. When you see your mother, can you ask her to give birth to a little brother or sister for you? They will play with you every day. Shin Nyenma's eyes lit up. Okay. Shinjioli patted the little stone. All right, Nyenma, it is time for you to practice. As expected, Shin Nyenma went to practice excitedly. Shinjioli put him back into his sleeve and then closed his eyes slightly to meditate. He was badly injured in the Golden Fire Sea, and his spiritual power was reduced by more than half. It would probably be very disadvantageous for him in the future. He had to race against time to recover. Shuema, it is good that you are still alive. Shuema, I wonder how you will react when you see us. Are you going to be engaged? The corners of his lips twitched slightly. Since he was here, how could he allow her to get engaged to someone else? Not to mention an engagement, even if she was going to get married, he would still take her back. When will the moon be bright? With a cup of wine in my hand, I asked the sky. I wonder what year it is in the palace in the sky. The sound of a zither could be heard coming from the depths of the garden. The wind blew the falling flowers, and the water flowed like a spring. It was very pleasant to the ears. In a boundless garden, all kinds of flowers were in full bloom. There were colorful butterflies fluttering among them, and the garden was filled with spring. There were exotic flowers and plants in the garden, as well as pavilions and terraces, as well as small bridges and flowing water. In a small pavilion sat a man in a green robe. That man had a rare elegance. His sky-blue robe dragged on the ground, and the wind blew his robe and long sleeves. In front of him was a chard-tailed parasol tree zither. His eyes were lowered, and his 10 fingers danced on the zither. Strands of zither music flew out from his fingertips, out of the gazebo, and into an open space not far away. In the open space, there was an antique swing, and on the swing sat a young girl in red. She looked to be 12 or 13 years old. Her eyebrows were picturesque, and her black hair hung down. The fringe in front of her forehead almost covered her eyebrows. Her eyes were slightly lowered, and her long eyelashes covered her eyelids like crow feathers. Under the sunlight, she was as quiet as a butterfly. Half of her body was leaning on the swing, as if she was sleeping or listening to the zither. She looked very comfortable. Not far from this open space, there was a meadow. On the meadow, there were a few children playing there. There were girls and boys, and each of them had delicate features and were as cute as jade. They were either chasing each other or playing around. It looked very harmonious and beautiful. The zither music stopped, and the man in green focused his gaze on the young girl. His gaze was gentle. Amo. Chapter 1581. The girl slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were red like gems. They were so deep that no one could see through them, but at the same time, they were so clear that one could see through her emotions. Every human being had 7 emotions and 6 desires. They could be happy, sad, or angry, but she was calm, absolutely calm. She looked lazy. Her gem-like eyes fell on the man. "What can I do for you?" The man sighed. "Ah, Mo, that song just now was very beautiful. I've never heard of it before. Do you think there's anything wrong with it?" Ah, Mo stretched lazily. "It's pretty good. I had a good night's sleep." The man was speechless. Did she think his song was a lullaby? "Ah, Mo, you wrote this song, so it must be your work. I didn't write this song." Ah, Mo swung back and forth on the swing. Her fluttering red dress was like a fluttering butterfly. She looked lazy as usual. The man was startled. "It wasn't you." Ah, Mo tilted her head and looked at him. She smiled, revealing 2 deep dimples on her cheeks. "Do you still think it's nice?" Her smile was almost malicious, with a hint of mockery. It was as if she had seen through everything and didn't care about it. The man smiled. "It doesn't matter if this song was made by you or not, it's still nice to listen to. Do you have any other songs? Why don't you teach me one?" Ah, Mo leaned her head on the swing and yawned. "I'm tired today. I'll teach you tomorrow. You can leave by yourself. Turn left at the exit. I won't see you out." She was rudely chasing him away. The man's eyes flickered. He slowly walked forward and gently pushed the swing for her. "Come, I'll swing it for you. You can rest a little." Ah, Mo didn't chase him away this time. She closed her eyes and continued to rest. The spring breeze warmed the air, and the fragrance of flowers and trees drifted in the air. The handsome man and beautiful woman were quite harmonious. The man gently swung her with just the right amount of strength. "Ah, Mo, do you like children a lot?" The man's gaze fell on the playful children. There were immortals and devils among the children, and there were even 2 little demons that had just cultivated into human form. The children of the immortal, devil, and demon realms were playing together like ordinary children. Ah, Mo didn't say anything. He just smiled like an innocent child. She liked the world of children. The world of children was simple and carefree. If possible, she wanted to turn everyone in the world into children. "Ah, Mo, let's have a few kids after we get married, okay?" The man put his hand on her shoulder. "Not good." Ah, Mo answered without hesitation. She jumped off the swing. "Yi Tianli, you should go. You don't have to come tomorrow." Yi Tianli raised his eyebrows. Ah, Mo, however, Mo no longer looked at him and only left him a sentence. "Don't worry, as long as you're still the strongest person in the immortal world, I will be engaged to you in the future." Yi Tianli froze slightly and blurted out, "Then, what if I'm not the strongest?" Ah, Mo didn't even turn her head. "I will only marry the strongest." Yi Tianli's fingers slowly clenched in his sleeves. In other words, she didn't want to marry him because of him, but because of his identity as the strongest person. He had been by her side for so long, but she still couldn't move her heart. "Ah, Mo, have you ever liked me?" "Like? What is it?" Ah, Mo finally turned her head. She tilted her head slightly. She looked innocent, but her eyes were as calm as flowing water. "I have never known what love is." Chapter 1582. Yi Tianli froze slightly. He looked down at his hands. His fingers were long and slender like jade. They were hands that could make the entire celestial world submit to them. These hands could play the zither, paint, and use extremely profound techniques. His hands alone could make countless fairies in the celestial world mesmerized. Not to mention, he also had an incomparably handsome face and incomparably powerful magical power. With this, no matter where he went, he could get the favor of countless fairies. No matter who he liked, he could get her. Of course, he was proud by nature and was not a casual person. So even though he was surrounded by bees and saucers, he had never been moved by any woman. As for Amo, at first, it was just a kind of pride. Amo said that she wanted to marry the strongest. He just wanted to prove that he was the strongest. He did not really want to marry this demon lord. But ever since he saw her, he was more and more attracted to her. She had a special temperament that made people unable to take their eyes off her. He had seen many cold fairies, but none of them had the kind of indifferent coldness that came from her bones. She also knew how to smile, especially when she tilted her head and smiled at you. It was indescribably flirtatious and indescribably evil. That pair of eyes seemed to be able to hook souls. A slight turn could make people fall head over heels for her. She seemed to have feelings, but in fact, she was emotionless. The depths of her eyes were like a pool of water that could not be stirred up. The more time they spent together, the more he wanted her to stare at him. He wanted to see her mesmerized look. But, he could not do it at the moment. His lips curled up slightly. He felt that he was a bit cheap. So many women wanted to get a glimpse of him, but he was more and more attracted to an almost heartless witch. He raised his head and looked at her back. The bright red clothes were like fire under the sun. It was such a bright color, but it gave people the feeling that she was in hell. That fire was the red lotus hellfire. He smiled gently. It's okay. Men were born to like challenges. He did not believe that after they got married in the future, he would not be able to get her heart after a long time. Demon Lord, the Lord of all demons, the pure demon born by heaven and earth, the ancestor of demons. No one knew how long she had existed in this world. Even the oldest deity in the immortal world didn't know when she had appeared. Before her rebirth, she was extremely mysterious. It was said that she had tens of thousands of incarnations, male, female, old, and young. Therefore, no one in the entire God's Demons continent knew her true appearance. They only knew that she was the spiritual leader of the demon realm. Once she made a move, the world would be turned upside down. It was a headache for many immortals. In the entire mythical infernal continent, it seemed that only that one divine power could truly compete with her. The God's Demons continent, was named after the existence of these two people. The celestial realm had the support of the gods, while the devil realm had the devil lord as its leader. Neither of the celestial realm or the devil realm was willing to submit to the other. It was said that tens of thousands of years ago, the celestial realm and the devil realm were turned upside down during the war of gods and devils. The entire 6 realms suffered a calamity, and countless beings in the 6 realms became cannon fodder in that war. Whether it was the immortal realm or the devil realm, both suffered heavy losses in that battle. Almost all of the immortal realm and devil realm were wiped out. Now, there were only a few survivors. Even he, Yi Tianli, was born after that battle. He only knew about the tragedy of that battle from a few surviving old immortals. He knew that the Devil Lord was called Amo. He had always imagined her to be a 3-headed, 6-armed figure. Chapter 1583. He had always imagined her as someone with 3 heads and 6 arms. He never thought that her real appearance was a girl who looked like a teenager. Tens of thousands of years ago, she went missing with that god in the demon god continent. The immortals and demons thought that she and that god had disappeared in that battle. They never thought that she would be reborn. Now that the demon had returned, what about the equally mysterious god? Would he return? Yi Tianli sighed. He felt that he was overthinking. The rebirth of the demon lord was already an accident. How could that god be reborn as well? When the demon lord was reborn, the world shook and there were anomalies in the 6 realms. If that god was reborn, the anomalies in the six realms would be even stronger. Now that there were no anomalies in the six realms, he guessed that God had really disappeared and would never return. Besides, deep in his heart, he did not want that god to be reborn. The demon god and the demon god were natural enemies. If they did not agree and fought on this continent, the six realms would be reshuffled. Fortunately, he had been with Amo for so long and did not see her make any big moves. She seemed to be too lazy to make any big moves. Her life was actually very simple. Since she won a good territory for the demon realm, she seemed to have lived a life of seclusion. She swung on the swing every day and played with the children. Her temperament was also like a child. As long as you did not provoke her, she was not difficult to get along with. In ancient legends, the demon lord was very aggressive. Now, it seemed that she had changed. Yi Tianli looked up at the sky. The sun was bright and the breeze was blowing. Perhaps, the day after tomorrow would also be a sunny day. After the day after tomorrow, she would definitely be his fiancée. He could then stay here for a long time. He looked at Amo again. She was sitting on a stone bench, looking at the group of children with her head tilted. No one could figure out what she was thinking. Yi Tianli's heart suddenly felt warm. If these children were his and her future children, then this scene seemed to be very heartwarming. He was looking forward to it. Amo did not know why, but she was a little restless today. This was a scene that she had never experienced since she was reborn in this continent. She did everything according to her heart. No matter what she was happy about, she would do it. If she was unhappy, she would destroy it. No one could make things difficult for her, so she had been living a carefree and comfortable life. She was the devil master, and all the devils in this world would have an innate fear when they saw her. According to what people said, demons were born to live in a dark and gloomy world, but she didn't like it. 3 years ago, she was reborn in this world, and the demons welcomed her back to the demon world with joy. She only stayed there for 2 days, and she didn't like it. She didn't like the sky that was always dark, she didn't like the cold barren hills and turbulent waters, she didn't like the dark rivers that were always flowing with blood, she didn't like anything in the devil world. Therefore, she decided to barge into the celestial world and negotiate with the people there to divide the territory. No leader of the earth realm was willing to give up their territory, and the celestial emperor of the celestial world was naturally unwilling as well. However, this demon lord was too powerful. Her strength was too terrifying. Not only could she defeat all the immortals in the immortal world, she also knew the art of war. Since the celestial world did not give her any land, she immediately led her troops to fight. After suffering a few losses, the immortal world finally understood that if they were to fight against this demon lord, not only would they have to pay a huge price and lose their immortal soldiers and immortal generals, they would also not be able to win. Chapter 1584. If they didn't agree to give her a piece of land, all the lands in the immortal realm would be lost. Thus, after half a year of fighting, the celestial emperor made a prompt decision to give the demon realm a large piece of land. He gave 2 of the 33 heavens to the demon realm. The spiritual energy in these 2 heavens was extremely abundant. It was a place where flowers bloomed in the warmth of spring, and where all living things grew and thrived. To cultivators, this was a paradise for immortals. However, demons were only sensitive to demonic chi. The denser the demonic chi, the faster they could cultivate. Rich spiritual energy was a blessing to immortals, but to demons, it was no less than a disaster. The celestial emperor didn't have good intentions when he gave such a piece of land to the demon realm. He was waiting for the demon realm to decline, waiting for them to return these 2 lands. But he didn't expect that after Amo led the demons to occupy these 2 heavens, she used some unknown method to convert the spiritual energy into demonic chi. The demons lived very comfortably in this land, and naturally had no intention of returning it. Fortunately, Immerse seemed to be satisfied after occupying these two heavens, and didn't make any further requests. She occupied one of the heavens to herself, and her daily life was very simple and comfortable. This made everyone in the immortal realm feel more at ease. In fact, the celestial emperor still hoped that the supreme divinity could return. That way, the immortal realm would be confident again, and they wouldn't have to act according to the demon lord's wishes like now. If necessary, he also wanted to drive the devils of the devil realm back to their former barren lands. It was a pity that he didn't have the strength to contend with the demon lord, if only the supreme divinity could return. Of course, this was what the highest echelons of the immortal realm thought. For ordinary immortals, this was actually quite good. It was better for immortals and demons to coexist peacefully than always fighting. Although the immortal and demon realms were turbulent internally, at least they could maintain peace on the surface. Immerse seemed to know this, but also didn't. She only followed her heart. If she liked something, she would do it. If she didn't like it, even if the sky fell and the earth cracked, it had nothing to do with her. She didn't know how long she could be satisfied with her current life. Life was too long, too long. Who could be satisfied with and like something for a long time? It was enough for her to like it now. After her rebirth this time, she did not remember anything from before the ancient times. She only remembered her own identity. However, those past events were already like smoke. The past was the past. So what if he knew? So what if he didn't know? It had nothing to do with her current life. She sat there and lazily watched the children play for a while. She felt a little uneasy, as if something unexpected was about to happen. She sat there and tried to figure it out, but to no avail. He stretched again. Forget it. Counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Anyway, she was a little bored now. If something could happen, it might be able to relieve her loneliness. She looked at the children playing around. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a little confused. She felt that it was a little noisy. She turned around and left the group of playful children. Once again, she walked under the swing and fluttered onto it, swinging lazily. She was a little sleepy, but for some reason, she couldn't fall asleep even if she closed her eyes. This feeling was not good. She sighed. If she knew this would happen, she would not have driven Yi Tianli away. At the very least, his music had a hypnotic effect. Chapter 1585. What a huge palace. It was unknown how many miles it had. Even if one looked down from the sky, one would not be able to see the edge. Looking in from the outside, one could only see layers of pavilions extending inwards. The pavilions were connected to the sky, and the jade trees were like clouds. Colorful haze floated in the air from time to time. From afar, it looked like it was floating in the clouds. Even the jade lake in the sky might not be able to compare to this, let alone a palace in the human world. There were two simple words on the tall lintel, Mo Palace. Because the day after tomorrow was the big day of the engagement between the Devil Lord and the celestial world Hermit Yi Tianli, the outside of Mo Palace was very busy. Some people from the six paths who were further away had already arrived in advance with all kinds of strange gifts. Outside Mo Palace, there were demons in charge of receiving guests. After checking all the people, they were brought into Mo Palace. At the entrance of Mo Palace, there were all kinds of carriages. These carriages were either luxurious, simple, or elegant. Obviously, the owners of each carriage were very extraordinary. Of course, the most important people in the six paths would not come in advance. Firstly, they wanted to maintain their noble status. Secondly, they all had extraordinary skills and could travel thousands of miles in an instant. It would not be too late for them to come on the day itself. No one in the 6 paths, no matter which world they were from, wanted to bump into the biggest bosses when they were giving gifts. If the gifts were better than those bosses would be unhappy. If the gifts were worse than theirs, it would be embarrassing. Therefore, it was better to come early and give gifts in advance. Everyone would be happier. Everyone on this continent knew that the Devil Lord liked children, especially beautiful children. Therefore, there were a lot of people giving these kinds of gifts this time. Mo Palace naturally had a place to receive these kinds of special gifts. They even opened up a new passage to Mo Palace for these gifts. At the entrance of this passage, there were already several carriages responsible for delivering these gifts. Although the style of each carriage was not the same, each carriage was extremely exquisite. Because the manager of Mo Palace, who received these gifts, said that only the most exquisite carriages were worthy of the most exquisite children, when it was close to noon, another carriage rushed over and stopped at the outermost area of the entrance. Manager Mo Palace looked at the carriage and frowned. That carriage looked more ordinary and shabby than the other carriages. Especially the 2 men driving the carriage. Although their clothes were still neat and tidy, their faces were bruised and swollen, as if they had just been beaten up. Palace manager Mo looked down on them and didn't even have the intention to welcome them. He only gestured to the 2 manservants beside him to receive them. As the saying goes, the king of hell is easy to meet, but the little ghosts are hard to deal with. The higher the rank of an official, the harder it would be for his attendants to serve him, and the higher his status would be. Now, in the 6 realms, the Devil Master's status was the highest. Even the guards outside her palace were more valuable and had a higher status than ordinary people. Therefore, even though the 2 of them were rather famous in the Devil realm, they were still extremely respectful to the 2 manservants from Mo Palace. They bowed their heads and explained their intentions. Naturally, the main point was how rare and precious their gift was. The 2 servants glanced at the carriage. They were more knowledgeable. Why is there a lock on the carriage? Is the gift inside very difficult to deal with? The 2 of them paused and coughed. It is indeed a little difficult. We even suffered a little in order to catch him. However, the goods inside are definitely rare. We've lived for so long, but we've never seen anything so beautiful. The Devil Master will definitely be happy to see it. Although he only mentioned his name and not his background, Palace Manager Mo didn't take it to heart. He was just a child. No matter how mysterious he was, what could he do? Such a peerless demon master would definitely be happy to see him. Steward Mo Gong did not ask any more questions. He said directly, "Little 9 Supremes, you've been selected. Come with me." He liked this child so much that he couldn't help but reach out to hold his hand to show his affection. However, the boy's eyes flashed slightly and he took half a step back, causing him to grab the air. Palace Manager Mo was taken aback. He glanced at the child again and felt that this child didn't know how to appreciate favors. She wanted to reprimand him, but when she saw his beautiful face, she decided against it. Forget it, he's just a kid. There's no need to be calculative. After all, the 2 people who had sent Shinjoli here were still worried, so they used a sound transmission technique to send a message to Chief Manager Mo Gong. Chapter 1587. The 2 people who had sent Shinjoli here were still worried, so they used telepathy to send a message to Palace Manager Mo, vaguely saying that the child's powers were not low, and that it would be better to investigate thoroughly before sending him to the Devil Lord. Palace Manager Mo's lips curled into a smile, not taking it to heart at all. Currently, there was no match for the Devil Lord in the entire continent of gods and demons, nor could they plot against him. No matter how impressive this child was, he was only a genius. What could he do? Children of such quality were too rare. Palace manager Mo was in a good mood and rewarded the two people handsomely. Then, he personally brought the selected children in. There were a total of 8 children selected this time, 3 girls and 5 boys. Naturally, all of them were stunning beauties, especially the 3 girls, who were practically a ball of powder. Originally, these children each had their own beauty, and it was hard to tell who was better. However, ever since Jo-zoon joined them, he was like a phoenix flying into a flock of chickens, stealing the limelight of all the children even though he hadn't even spoken a word. The other children all had different reactions. The 3 girls were still fine, but the other 4 boys simply had the heart to scratch his face to pieces. The 3 girls couldn't help but want to get closer to him, to surround him. Children at this age were still ignorant, and liked to be straightforward no matter what they said or did. Their likes were written all over their faces, and their dislikes were also written all over their faces. One of the bolder girls even ran to his side, looking at him with a pair of big, adorable eyes. Jo-zoon, I'll marry you when I grow up, okay? I want to be your wife. Palace manager Mo, who was leading the way, was shocked by her words. He turned back to look at Jo-zoon, wanting to see his reaction. Unexpectedly, the little fellow was so cool. He acted as if he hadn't heard anything, and only cared about walking. The girl was a feisty one. Naturally, she wasn't satisfied that her confession didn't get a response. She immediately chased after him, reaching out to pull Jo-zoon's hand, wanting to act coy. Okay. She didn't touch Jo-zoon's hand, because her hand touched an invisible barrier halfway through. As if struck by lightning, she retracted her hand abruptly. It was probably the first time the girl had encountered such a huge setback, for she burst into tears. Palace chief eunuch Mo didn't pay any attention to him, because the demon master had once said that there was no need to control the children too much. It was fine to just let them grow up freely. Moreover, the Devil Lord liked the new and hated the old. Most of the children who entered the palace stayed in Mo Palace for half a year before being sent away. Mo Palace was huge, so huge that it seemed to have no end. The path these children were on was obviously special, as it led directly to the depths of Mo Palace. The child called Jo-zoon was naturally Shinjuli. He thought that his gift would be unique, but he didn't expect to enter the palace with this bunch of little radishes. This scene was rather similar to the emperor choosing a candidate, and she was the candidate. Shinjuli had never thought that he would be reduced to such a state one day. Thinking about it, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He followed palace steward Mo inside, taking in the surrounding scenery along the way. The scenery here was very beautiful, and every brick and tile was ingenious. Some places gave him a vague feeling of familiarity. He raised his eyes and looked into the depths of the building. What would she look like after her rebirth? Would she still remember him? Passing through many courtyards and winding corridors, Palace Chief Eunuch Mo led them for who knew how long before he finally stopped in front of a large garden. He had the children wait at the door while he went in to report. Chapter 1588. The group of children was still quite nervous. After all, they did not know what would happen to them after they were sent in as gifts. The more they did not know, the more afraid they were. Some of the children even guessed that there were monsters hiding inside and that they were sent in to be fed to the monsters. Shinjuli was silent. His hearing was amazing, and he could already hear the children playing inside. However, he did not hear her. "Little brother, will we be eaten?" The little girl who was crying earlier had already stopped crying. At this moment, she came to talk to Shinjuli again. Shinjuli was too lazy to pay attention to the little kid. He took 2 steps to the side. He had a kind of aura that kept people away. The children did not dare to do anything to him. He was so unsociable, so the children looked at each other and isolated him. After a while, the general manager came back. However, the news he brought back made Shinjioli look down. He looked a little strange. He passed the Devil Lord's order. The Devil Lord said that she was not interested in children recently, so the children who were sent here today were to be returned. She did not need to see them. After the oral order was passed, the group of children had different reactions. They were happy and sad. No one dared to disobey the Devil Lord's order. Therefore, although the general manager felt regretful, he still led the group of children out. When the general manager led the group of children to the gate of the Mo Palace, he inadvertently looked back and was suddenly stunned. There were 7 children left behind. The prettiest and most stunning child had disappeared. He asked the other children, and they seemed to have just realized that the child was missing. They were even more confused than him. The general manager's heart sank. His kung fu was one of the best in the Devil Kingdom. Even if a mosquito flew past him, he could instantly distinguish the gender of the mosquito. Now that a child was missing, he only realized it now. That child was indeed not simple. The general manager did not care about anything else. He handed the remaining 7 children to another servant and turned back to look for the child himself. "Father, is mommy really here?" Shin Yanma had been holding back for a long time. Now, he finally had the time to ask. "There should be." Shinjioli replied with 3 words. He had already arrived at the big garden. "But why doesn't mommy want to see us? Doesn't she miss us?" Shin Yanma felt wronged. Shinjioli said, "It doesn't matter. If she doesn't want to see us, we can go see her." He looked at the gate of the garden and paused for a moment. There was a barrier around the garden. Moreover, it was the kind of enchantment with extremely strong magic power. If one did not have a special identity, they would not be able to enter and exit the gate at will. His gaze fell on the barrier, and there seemed to be waves in the depths of his eyes. With such a strong enchantment, it seemed that her martial arts were strong enough, which made him feel quite gratified. The only thing that made him unhappy was that with his current power, it was not impossible for him to forcefully break the barrier, but it would also alarm the people in the garden. If he scared her away, suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. He turned around and saw the chief steward dashing over. His eyes flickered, but he didn't do anything. When the steward saw him, he heaved a sigh of relief. "Little ancestor, who allowed you to come back on your own?" She raised her hand and was about to tug at his sleeve and leave. Shinjioli stepped back smoothly, and the steward grabbed nothing. "I want to see the Devil Master," Shinjioli said. Unless he personally led the way, no one would be able to enter without making a sound. "Lord Devil Master." The steward bowed respectfully under the swing. Amo didn't even open her eyes. She said indifferently, "What are you doing here again?" The steward raised the red stone above his head. "Lord Devil Master, someone sent such a rare item. This subordinate guesses that Lord Devil Master might like it, so I boldly offer it to you." Amo lazily opened her eyes. When her gaze landed on the stone, her pupils suddenly shrank. She slowly got up from the swing and raised her hand. A faint red light flashed and the red stone was already in her palm. Chapter 1590. She looked down at the baby in the stone, and the baby in the stone was also looking at her with his eyes wide open. Usually, a newborn baby would be wrinkled and would not be considered good-looking. However, this baby was different. His facial features were already very delicate, especially his pair of big and watery eyes. Being stared at by such a pair of eyes, even a heart of stone would instantly melt into a puddle of water. The baby was almost leaning on the stone wall to look at her. His eyes were getting bigger and bigger, and his little mouth was flattened again and again. He seemed to be getting more and more aggrieved. His expression made Amo inexplicably nervous. Just as she was about to say something, the baby suddenly cried, "Mommy." Amo's hand trembled. The small stone in her hand fell to the ground. Her expression changed slightly. She waved her sleeve and caught the small stone before it fell to the ground. She was about to pick it up. Suddenly she heard the sound of something tearing. Half of her sleeve was soaked through. Oh no! She did not expect the small stone to be so fragile. It broke before it fell to the ground, and the beautiful baby in it. She turned her sleeve and rolled the broken stone up to see if there was any possibility of repairing it. However, the moment she rolled it up, she was stunned again. The red stone had broken into 2 pieces, and a naked baby was lying on her sleeve. His 2 little hands were desperately holding the cloth as he cried heartbreakingly, "Mommy, Mommy, Nyenma has finally found you. Don't you want Nyenma anymore?" Below, General Manager Mo's palace, who had not had time to leave, was also shocked by the scene. His mouth was so wide open that it could fit a duck egg. Mo was stunned. She looked down at the baby who was desperately clinging to her sleeve like an octopus. She was afraid that he would fall again, so she quickly used her sleeve to wrap him up. However, she was a little speechless. Did the baby born from the stone have a baby's nestling complex? The first person he saw after he was born was his own mother. However, fortunately, the little guy was fine. Seeing that he was crying so loudly and full of confidence, he should not be hurt. The little guy cried very happily. It seemed that he wanted to cry out all the grievances that he had not been able to see his mother these days. Tears rolled down one by one, and Mo's heart was in a mess. "Don't cry. Don't cry." Manager Mo Gong finally regained his senses. This stone fetus was too strange. It didn't come out earlier or later. It just had to come out of its shell when it was in the Devil Master's hands. It even made the Devil Master's body so wet and dirty. More importantly, it was one thing for a baby to roll out of the stone, but why were there so many other things? There were books, paintings, and even a rattledrum. What was even stranger was that although these things were rolled out from the fetal fluid, they were not wet at all. They were clean as if they were new. Lord Devil Master loved cleanliness. She would directly destroy her clothes if there were more water stains on her body. Now, her sleeves were wet with such a large unknown liquid, and that smooth doll. He hurriedly took a step forward. "Demon Master, give him to me first." This doll was a freak. He had to get it out and study it. At the very least, he had to clean it up before considering if he should give it to the Lord Devil to play with. Mo looked at the crying doll on her sleeve and felt that it was time to deal with the child first. You first." Just as he was about to say something along the lines of, "Go take a bath with the chief steward first," the child's body suddenly stiffened. Just a moment ago, he was crying as if the sky had collapsed. Now, he was laughing like an angel. She looked at him in a daze. It was true that she liked children, but of all the children she had brought into the garden, none of them had been able to stir her emotions like this one. Could it be because she had personally delivered him? She watched the child happily play in the basin, so she let him do as he pleased. She raised her hand and the red stone that had broken in half appeared in her palm again. Chapter 1592. She raised her hand, and the broken red stone appeared in her palm again. She studied it for a moment and touched it with her hand. She did not expect that the stone could give birth to a baby. Then, she looked at the rattledrum and other things on the ground and shook her head. It was quite unbelievable. Her eyes fell on the scroll again. She paused for a moment and gently waved her sleeve. The scroll opened silently, and the person in the painting appeared. In the painting, there was a girl playing the pipe. She was about 18 or 19 years old. Her red dress was in full swing, and her eyes were lively. It was as if she could walk out of the painting with just a breath of air. "Mommy, that is you. Do I look good?" Shin-Yen-Ma held the edge of the basin with his two little hands. He looked at the painting and then at Amo. "Mommy is really beautiful. You look better than the painting." Amo raised her hand and touched her face. Then, she looked at the painting again and tilted her head as if she was thinking about something. She nodded and said, "You do look like you." She took the little guy out of the basin and wiped him dry with a cloth. The little guy obediently let her play with him and closed his eyes comfortably. His mommy's fingers were so soft and warm. In the past, she used to touch him through his belly. Now, she could really touch him. Babies like to be touched by their mothers. It was an instinct, and Shin-Yen-Ma was no exception. He did not expect to see his mommy again one day. He did not expect to be in his mommy's arms as soon as he was born. At this moment, Shin-Yen-Ma no longer blamed his father for betraying him. It felt good to be by his mommy's side. Shin-Yen-Ma happily rubbed his big head on his mommy's hand. However, his mommy looked so small. If he did not smell like his mommy, he would have called her sister when he fell into her sleeve. The little guy was indeed a child who jumped out of a stone. His skin was so soft and tender when he was just born. Especially when the little guy was so adorable. When he rubbed his big head on her hand, Amo felt as if her cold heart had been opened, revealing the softness in her heart. She didn't prepare any child's clothes here, so after giving the boy a bath, Amo couldn't find any clothes for him to wear. She wanted to conjure a set of clothes for him, but the clothes she conjured would contain a spell after all. She was afraid that the child's skin was too tender and wouldn't be able to withstand it. She hesitated for a moment before taking the sound-transmitting talisman and instructing Palace Manager Mo to buy several sets of baby clothes as quickly as possible. Of course, the faster, the more comfortable, the better. "What's your name?" Mo asked casually as he combed his soft hair. Shin-Yen-Ma. Shin-Yen-Ma sat there obediently. Mo paused for a moment and looked at the child in a daze. "You have parents?" Shin-Yen-Ma turned his head and looked at her with confusion. "Mommy, aren't you my mother?" He pursed his lips and was about to cry again. "Mommy, don't tell me you still don't recognize me. Nyen-Ma misses you so much these days." He reached out his little hand and pulled her sleeve. His pair of eyes were covered with tears. He looked at her with watery eyes as if he was afraid that he would be abandoned. Mo's heart softened. She hugged him in her arms and kissed his forehead naturally. "Nyen-Ma, good boy. Mother. Mother recognizes you." Although it was a little awkward to say the word mother, there was some warmth in his heart. Chapter 1593. The little guy was very good at seizing the opportunity. He immediately stretched out his little arms and wrapped them around her neck. He kissed her on the cheek and then laid his big head on her shoulder. He greedily sniffed her scent and yawned. "Mother, I am sleepy." There was a gentle knock on the door. "Devil Master, I am here to bring you some clothes." Mo was slightly stunned. How fast? This time, the efficiency of the manager was extraordinarily high. She flicked her finger, and the door opened from both sides. She also used her sleeve to cover the little body of the baby in her arms. She was worried that he would catch a cold. General Manager Mo came in with a tray in his hand. There were a few sets of baby clothes neatly stacked on the tray. "Devil Master, what do you think of these?" The general manager handed the clothes to her. Amo did not take them with her hands. She only said, "Put them on the table over there. You can leave now." General Manager Mo's fingers froze for a moment. He retracted his hand and answered, "Yes." Then, he put the tray on the table. Amo did not pay attention to him. Her attention was focused on the baby in her arms. The little guy's hair was still wet. The wind might make him sick. Palace Manager Mo's gaze swept over her and the child. He looked at the little fellow lying in her arms with her bare buttocks and her arms wrapped around her neck. Her saliva was about to drip onto her mother's neck. "Devil Master, why don't you let me help him get dressed?" General Manager Mo volunteered. Palace Manager Mo was actually a rather handsome young man. He walked over as he spoke. Mo frowned slightly. "No need. Get out." She did not know why, but she did not want anyone to take care of the baby on her behalf. General Manager Mo was stunned. His arms hung down. "Yes." He walked backward and took a look at the little guy before he left. The little guy was sleepy with his eyes closed. He inexplicably shivered when he was glanced at. He looked up in a daze to see where the chill came from. There were only him and his mother in the room. He looked around and did not see anyone else, so he snuggled into his mother's arms and tried to find a comfortable position to sleep. Mo put him on the bed. When she was about to get up to check on the clothes, the little boy held her arm and refused to let go. "Mother, don't leave me. I want to sleep with you." Mo patted his little body. "Wait, mother will bring you some clothes." There was also demonic chi in her blanket, and this little fellow was covered in immortal chi. She was afraid that he would not be able to withstand it. She looked at the small clothes. The clothes were extraordinarily exquisite. Whether it was the cut or the fabric, they were all unique. She rubbed the small clothes with her hands. These clothes did not seem to be made of materials from this continent. She picked a set and put it on the little guy. Chapter 1594. Mo was not used to having a little boy in her arms all of a sudden. The sleepiness that she had just cultivated was all gone. She opened her eyes and looked at the child in her arms. There was a faint feeling in her heart. It was a kind of sharp pain that went deep into her soul. Before the image could appear, she forced it down. She closed her eyes and pulled her arm out from under the sleeping child. Silently, she moved to the side and slightly distanced herself from the child. The more you cared about something, the easier it was to lose it. Instead of that, she would rather not care about anything. Had she not lived the same way for the past 3 years? It was good to have such a carefree attitude. She did not want to change it. As for this child, it was better for her not to get too close. Shen Yanma was probably afraid of being abandoned. He was very insecure and felt that his mother was far away from him in his sleep. Even though he was still in a daze, his body still managed to roll to her side. He only stopped when he reached her arm. Then, he used his 2 little hands to hold her hand in his arms and murmured, "Mommy, don't abandon me." Mo was about to withdraw her hand, but when she heard him murmuring in his sleep, she froze. She lowered her eyes and let him hold her. The great devil liked to be quiet, so there were no other buildings around her palace. There were only countless tall trees that covered the sky. Shinjioli was sitting on top of a big tree with thick branches and leaves. The branches and leaves covered his body. He had also concealed his aura. Even if someone passed by under the tree, no one would be able to discover his whereabouts. Not far from the tree was Ning Xuema's palace. In the palace, his wife and son were sleeping soundly. If possible, he also wanted to sleep with his wife and son in his arms. However, he could not. Now was not the time for him to appear. If he appeared in front of her now, it would only make things worse. Therefore, he had to wait. He had to wait until the most suitable time to appear in front of her. Moreover, he had to make it so that she had no room to refuse. Shinjioli was rarely impulsive. Sometimes, he would be simple and direct. He would be quick and decisive to solve the problem completely. Otherwise, he could advance step by step. By the time the other party was alerted, he would have already set up all the traps and would not be able to escape even if he wanted to. Of course, there were very few things in this world that could trouble him. Most of the time, he used the first method to solve most problems. He was not in a hurry. He had endured for so long, so he did not mind waiting for a few more days. He lowered his eyes and pondered for a moment. Then, his figure flashed and left. He was very relieved that the child was with his mother. Right now, his top priority was to recover. He had to make the best use of his time to recover his strength. He knew of a good place to recover his strength. Yi Tianli did not expect that in less than a day after he left, Imo had a child in her arms. At that time, the sky was high, the clouds were light, and the wind was cool. Imo was playing on a swing with a child in her arms. The child was lying in her arms and swinging with her, giggling from the teasing. Yi Tianli was standing under the swing with a zither in his arms. He was a little surprised to see this scene. After a pause, he said, "Imo." Imo's red dress fluttered on the swing. She was holding the child with one arm. She tilted her head and looked at him. "You're here. Play another song. I'll swing him along with the music." She realized that the child had a strong sense of music. When she hummed a song, he would use his little hand to clap the beat for her. Chapter 1595. Yi Tianli was speechless. Indeed, he was good at playing the guqin. It was fun to please her with the music, but he could use it to coax the child. Mo, this child. He was about to ask if the child was also sent by someone else. Unexpectedly, the child wrapped his arms around Mo's neck and said softly, "Mother, Nianma is hungry." Yi Tianli was shocked. Mother? Wasn't it too casual to call her mother? He could not help but look at Mo. Mo seemed to have approved of the name. She raised her hand and rubbed Shin Nianma's head. "Okay, I will ask someone to prepare something for you. What do you want to eat?" She had never raised such a small child before, so she really did not know what he could eat. Shin Nianma immediately asked for a few things. Mo did not hesitate and immediately summoned the head servant of Palace Missouri to prepare. Yi Tianli was left alone for a long time. Finally, he could not help but ask, Mo, when did this child come?" "Just last night." Mo casually said. She lowered her head and asked Shin Nianma, "Are you thirsty?" "Yes," Shin Nianma answered obediently. He was not thirsty, but he liked the feeling of being cared for by his mother. Also, he did not like the man standing below. He always felt that he was going to steal his mother away. Yi Tianli staggered. Just born. For the first time, the gentle and elegant son of the celestial world, who would not change his expression even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, stuttered. He was really shocked. He was going to be engaged with his sweetheart tomorrow, but she came out today with a child. The problem was, he did not see her pregnant. She even looked like a virgin. How could it be? At this moment, the head servant of Palace Missouri came in and explained, this child was sent by someone. He was born in a stone embryo. Before he could finish his explanation, Mo glared at him. The head servant immediately shut up. Yi Tianli heaved a sigh of relief. That scared him. He looked at the child again. The child was holding a jade cup and drinking water. His posture was actually quite elegant. He did not look like a child who had just been born. Was he born in a stone embryo? A demon child? No, there was no demonic aura on his body. Instead, there seemed to be a faint white glow around him. That was the holy light that even ordinary immortals did not have. Yi Tianli raised his hand and shot out a gentle silver light. He wanted to test the child's aptitude. Unexpectedly, just as he shot out the silver light, the child screamed, "Mommy, he wants to kill me." A white light shot out from his body and went straight for the silver light. The silver light was more powerful than the white light. Seeing that the silver light was about to cover Shen Nianma's head, Amo raised his sleeve. A faint red light met the silver light. The silver light trembled and disappeared in an instant. "What are you doing?" Amo glanced at Yi Tianli, his voice cold. Yi Tianli was speechless. I just wanted to test his aptitude. No need. Amo held the child in his arms. "He's mine. You don't have to ask." Yi Tianli, he paused for a moment. "Amo, we will be engaged tomorrow. I will be your future husband. If this child recognizes you as his mother, I will be his future father." At first, Shen Nianma did not understand what he said. However, he understood the last sentence. He immediately opened his eyes wide. "No. I want my own father. I don't want him to be my father." Yi Tianli was speechless. His eyes flashed slightly. He gently said, "Nianma, your name is Nianma, right? Who is your father? Tell me, and I will help you find him, okay?" Chapter 1596. He did not like the child. If the child had parents, he would help to find them so that the child would not have to pester Amo like this. Oh no. Shen Nianma shook his head like a rattledrum and looked at him with caution. "You are a bad person. You want to separate me and my mother. I don't want to talk to you." Yi Tianli was speechless. This kid. He smiled and did not want to argue with the child. He shook his head and ignored him. He looked at Amo and said, "Amo, this child is really attached to you. He probably thinks that you are his mother." "She's my mother." Shen Nianma interrupted him unhappily and even kissed Amo's neck to show off. His saliva was all over Amo's face. Yi Tianli was speechless again. He could not be serious with a child. He looked at Shen Nianma again and suddenly had a thought. The child's mouth and nose were similar to Amo's. Was it a coincidence? Or was it? Nianma, this name seemed to be a little special. He blurted out, "Did this child really jump out from the stone?" At this time, General Manager Mo could finally interrupt. "It is true. The stone that the child hid in was sent by me." General Manager Mo would not lie. Yi Tianli nodded. The child's origin is indeed strange. Where did the stone come from? It was sent by a child. General Manager Mo answered. "Mo, are you this seat's chief steward or his chief steward?" Mo asked coldly. General Manager Mo shuddered and finally came back to his senses. He seemed to have said too much. He quickly took a step back and did not want to say anything more. Mo looked at Yi Tianli with a faint smile. "Is it necessary for you to investigate my affairs so thoroughly?" "Mo, I am just doing it for your own good." Yi Tianli sighed softly. "This is the first time I see you being so concerned about a child, so I want to know more about him to avoid any accidents that might hurt you. I don't need your kindness. I know what I am doing." Mo stuffed a small pastry into Shen Nianma's mouth to stop him from talking. Yi Tianli smiled and cleverly stopped talking about this topic. Mo, shall we go to the pear sea today? The pear blossoms over there are blooming nicely. Mo was a little lazy. When she was about to say no, Shen Nianma's eyes lit up. Li Hua. Nianma wanted to see it. Mother, can you bring Nianma to have a look? He asked softly. Mo's heart softened, and she nodded. Okay. Yi Tianli's heart skipped a beat again. He quietly glanced at Shen Nianma. In fact, he did not want Mo to bring this little burden, but he smiled and said, if that's the case, let's go. He stretched out his hand. Mo, you must be tired of carrying him all the time. Why don't you give him to me? It's a good opportunity for me to cultivate a relationship with him. No, no. Shen Nianma immediately hugged Mo's neck and refused to let go. I only want my mother to hug me, not him. This child was indeed too clingy. Usually, people who clung to her did not end up well. Mo's face darkened. Let go. Her voice was slightly cold, and the faint aura around her made Shen Nianma's little body stiffen. He slowly let go of his hand and looked at Mo with a pair of big eyes. Mother. Was his mother scolding him? Even someone as cold-hearted as head steward Himu felt his eyes ache from his cries. Thousands of pear trees were blooming. The snow-white petals of the pear blossoms fluttered in the air and fluttered to the ground. The scenery was too beautiful to behold. Mo walked among them. Her black hair fluttered, and her red dress fluttered. She was like a painting. Yi Tianli walked side by side with her. He sighed softly. Mo, I hope we can have this day every year. Mo raised her head and looked around the pear blossom forest. She was a little distracted. She did not know why, but Shen Nianma's big teary eyes kept flashing in front of her. She even seemed to hear his cries in her ears. In the small theater Shen Jiuli coldly said, Moo Moo, you can torture me. I am not afraid of torture, but how dare you torture my baby? Are you not afraid that I will slap you away? Moo Moo immediately smiled flatteringly. That, great God, this is the plot's need, the plot's need. Your wife is too cold now, you have to let her live again, you can't stir up waves in her heart, let your son do it. Shen Jiuli was speechless. I'd rather you torture me. Moo Moo sighed. These days, there are still people who want to be tortured. Shen Jiuli's voice was cold. What did you say? Moo Moo immediately smiled. Well, it's nothing. Oh right, great master, you have always been high and mighty in this drama. You are known as the great master. Now, Moo Moo has also participated in the competition between the goddesses. It is now the last round, the decisive moment. Can you get your fans to like my post and post a comment for me? Shen Jiuli, where? Moo Moo, it's in the comments section below the book, in the pinned post. Click on it and let the fans stretch out their cute little hands, like the post and leave a comment. Of course, your fans are as talented as the clouds. If you follow the request and post a 300-word long comment, that would be even better. Shen Jiuli snorted. What's the reward? Moo Moo gritted his teeth. How about more than 1,000 likes and one more comment? Shen Jiuli, deal. Chapter 1598. She frowned. Something was wrong with her state of mind. Even if the child was close to her, he was not hers after all, she was the one who brought him out of the stone shell. He called her mother, but she might not be his mother, she seemed to have placed too much emphasis on the child. Mo, what's wrong? Mo was distracted for a moment. She tripped over a tree root and staggered. Yi Tianli hurriedly supported her. Amo touched her forehead and closed her eyes slightly. When she opened them again, they were clear. She smiled. Nothing, Yi Tianli. Play another song for me. She flew up to a pear tree and leaned on the branch, looking like she was all ears. Yi Tianli naturally would not refuse her request. Okay. His eyes flashed slightly. Amo seemed to be particularly easy to talk to today. She also smiled more. One of them was listening on the tree while the other was playing under the tree. It was harmonious and beautiful. Time slipped by in this harmonious and beautiful atmosphere. The two of them had a lot of fun this time. When they returned, the sky was already filled with stars. Before they parted, Yi Tianli held Amo's hand. Under the starlight, his eyes were as bright as the stars. Amo, tomorrow is our big day. After tomorrow, we can be together forever. Do you like it? Amo yawned. I like it. It seemed good to have someone to accompany her like this. Her days were not so difficult. Under the starlight, she was stunningly beautiful. Her indifferent appearance had a strange temperament that made Yi Tianli's heart beat faster. He couldn't help but raise his hand and pull her, wanting to pull her into his embrace for a kiss. However, he didn't expect that the other party would just lift her sleeve and escape his grasp. She waved her hand at him and said, "All right, go. See you tomorrow." She turned around and disappeared without a trace. Yi Tianli stood there for a moment and looked at his hand. It still had the residual warmth of her hand. That small hand seemed to have always been cold, like a cold soft jade. When he held it, it seemed to be able to freeze his heart. Was it because she was a demon? He did not know if her lips were as cold as her hand. When they were engaged tomorrow, he should be able to taste her lips, right? Who knew that he had been with her for more than a year, and they had been together almost every day, but they had never been intimate? It wasn't that he didn't want to, but she had a kind of intimidating aura that made him not dare to act rashly. Up until now, it was just a simple handshake. However, it would be different after tomorrow. Tomorrow, he would officially be her fiancé. Everything would be different from what it used to be. She probably wouldn't reject him if he tried to be intimate with her again. When Amo returned to Mo Palace, it was already close to dawn. She had wanted to summon He Moved to ask about little Munchkin's situation, but on second thought, she decided against it. That child would only cry a few times. He was probably asleep by now. It wouldn't be too late for her to visit him tomorrow. Thinking of this, she directly returned to her own palace. She liked peace and quiet, so she didn't need any maids to serve her. Her palace was only cleaned by her maids at a specific time every morning. Usually, there was no one in her palace. She walked to the door of her bedroom and suddenly paused. There was a small figure curled up in front of the door. He was sitting there motionlessly, as if he had fallen asleep. Her heart felt like it had been hit by something. Chapter 1599. She felt as if her heart had been struck by something. Little Munchkin. Why was he here? What was the bastard He Moo doing? Why did he let the child run out alone? She stepped forward and carried the little guy. However, she felt that something was wrong. The little guy's body was hot as if he was having a fever. She looked at his face under the starlight and felt as if her heart was being pricked again. The little guy's face was pale, and his eyes were swollen like walnuts. Apparently, he had been crying for a long time. She did not know if he was asleep or unconscious at the moment. His little nose was moving, and from time to time, he would say in his sleep, "Mommy, don't abandon Nyanma." Amo's arm trembled slightly. She raised her hand and touched his forehead. It was also hot. Her heart tightened. Nyenma, Nyenma. She tried to call him a few times. The little guy's body stiffened, and he slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were so swollen that he could only open them slightly. The moment he saw Amo, he tried hard to open his eyes. There were tears in his eyes. He reached out his little hand and carefully touched her cheek. Mommy. Amo's heart ached. She answered, Nyenma, why are you here? Didn't he make arrangements for you? This bastard. I will call him here now. Nyenma's body trembled. He hugged her arm tightly and pouted as if he was about to cry. However, he tried hard to hold it in. He tried to negotiate with her. Nyenma wants to sleep with Mommy. I don't want him. Mommy, please don't abandon me again, okay? I will be good and listen to you. I will not throw tantrums anymore. His voice was choked with sobs. His careful behavior inexplicably made Amo feel suffocated. It was as if a ball of cotton was stuffed in her throat. She almost could not speak. Nyenma. She called out to him, but didn't know what to say for a moment. She sighed and was just about to carry him into her bedroom when she saw head steward Himu rushing over. She stopped in her tracks and looked at him coldly. When Himu saw the child in her arms, he let out a sigh of relief. However, when he saw the expression on the Devil Lord's face, he trembled again and knelt down. Devil Lord, I did not do a good job. Please punish me. What is going on? How could you leave him here alone so late at night? Amo's voice was so cold that it could freeze ice. Head steward Himu felt bitter in his heart. He never thought that this little ancestor could cry so much. Ever since the great devil master and Yi Tianli left, he had been crying non-stop. One moment, he cried for his mother, and the next moment, he cried and said, Nyenma will be good. Mommy will come back. No matter how hard he tried to coax her, she wouldn't budge. He almost suspected that the child was made of water. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Tomorrow was the day of the wedding, and head steward Himu had many things to do, so he didn't have time to hold the child often. The child was crying so much that in his anxiety, he locked him up in a small dark room, hoping to teach him a lesson. Of course, he was also afraid that he would get into an accident. The walls of the small dark room were soft, so even if he bumped around inside, he wouldn't have any problems. After locking up the little fellow, he went to do other things. By the time head steward Himu thought of him again, 4 hours had already passed. In the end, he was still worried and ran back. From afar, he could still hear the little fellow's heart-wrenching cries. That voice was already hoarse, his heart tightened, and he finally realized that locking him in the dark room would not work. It would only make things worse. He quickly carried him out and comforted him for a long time. Chapter 1600. In order to stop the little fellow's cries, head steward Himu even did something as unstylish as crawling on the ground like a turtle. Only then did the little fellow's loud cries turn into small sobs, perhaps because he had cried for too long. The little fellow was also tired. He fell asleep before the sky even turned dark. Head steward Himu finally breathed a sigh of relief. He carried the little fellow back to his room and placed him on his bed. Unexpectedly, he woke up again as soon as he was put down. As soon as he woke up, he cried for his mommy and wanted to sleep in her room. Head steward Himu was so annoyed by the little fellow's tantrum that his mommy wouldn't want him anymore if he cried again. She would completely abandon him. She wouldn't see him for the rest of her life. This sentence was very effective. The little fellow finally stopped crying and obediently stayed in head steward Himu's room. Perhaps the little fellow's Shinjioli genes were too strong. He had a slight obsession with cleanliness. Head steward Himu's bed was so clean, but he still disliked it. After he was put on it, he refused to crawl under the covers. He couldn't scold him either. If he did, he would cry. Head steward Heimu had no choice but to have a new bed made and new bedding. Only then did the little fellow reluctantly crawl under the covers and fall asleep. Head steward Heimu was tormented by him for a day. It was more tiring than climbing a mountain for a day. He still had a lot of work to do, so after the little fellow fell asleep, he went out to do his work. After a few hours, he dragged his tired body back to find that the little ancestor on the little bed was gone. He clearly knew how important the little fellow was to the Devil Master. In his panic, he had no choice but to search desperately. Fortunately, he still remembered that the little fellow wanted to sleep with his mother, so he came here with the intention of giving it a try. He didn't expect to find the little fellow and the Devil Master to come back. Seeing the Devil Master's unkind expression, he could only kowtow and apologize. He briefly explained what had happened. Mo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pursed his lips and didn't know what to feel. He reprimanded head steward Heimu and ordered him to do a few things. Only then did he carry the little fellow into his room. The little fellow had clearly jumped out of a stone. He could talk and run as soon as he was born, and even knew how to fight. This kind of child would be a strange existence in any of the 6 realms. Mo thought that children like him were the strongest, but he didn't expect him to fall sick and have a fever. After entering the bedroom, Shinyanma finally knew that he would not be thrown out. He breathed a sigh of relief. Children always like to sleep. Moreover, he had been busy the whole day. Coupled with his illness, he almost fell asleep when Gu Shijo put him on the bed. Perhaps he was afraid of being left alone. Even though he was half asleep, his little hand was still tightly gripping Mo's sleeve. Mo had wanted to give him some medicine, but as soon as she got up and tugged at her sleeve, he burst into tears again. His 2 little hands flailed in the air as he cried for his mommy. This child was extraordinarily insecure. Mo's eyes also stung slightly. He had no choice but to carry him, find him some medicine, and feed him. Shinyanma was a good boy. As long as his mother carried him, he would not struggle. No matter how bitter the medicine was, he could swallow it with a frown. Mo massaged him once more, tossing and turning for a full 2 hours before he was finally covered in sweat. The little fellow's physical fitness was still very strong. After sweating, his high fever finally subsided. He was probably exhausted. Once the fever subsided, he fell asleep very quickly. Mo lay next to him. The little fellow was like a dog skin plaster, sticking close to her as he slept. Chapter 1601. What happened today must have traumatized him. Even in his deep sleep, he would occasionally sob and murmur, "Nyenma will be a good boy. Mommy, don't lose Nyenma." His big head snuggled in her arms before he could continue to sleep. Mo opened his eyes and looked at the top of the bed. His eyes were flickering with uncertainty. She raised her hand to touch her forehead. Intuitively, she felt that her carefree life was coming to an end. This little guy had only been with her for a day, but he had already become her weakness. She turned to look at the child beside her and carefully observed his eyebrows and eyes. She had already treated his eyes. The swelling had gradually subsided and returned to its original appearance. At this moment, his eyelashes were still a little playful. They covered his eyes and formed a dense silhouette, which made people want to kiss them. Suddenly, she smiled gently. If your child was still alive, he should be as cute as him. Somewhere in her heart, there was a sudden pain. It was as if a long-sealed scar had been exposed. She touched her chest with her fingers. She did not know who she was trying to persuade. Silly. That child is not meant to be with you. Let it go. Only by letting it go can you be free. Haven't you lived a good life for the past 3 years? She felt inexplicably impetuous in her heart. She pursed her lips tightly. She looked at her fingertips and realized that her spell seemed to be a little ineffective. Perhaps she should strengthen it. She closed her eyes, and a faint red light appeared on her fingertips. Once again, she suppressed the inexplicable emotions in her heart and suppressed them to the corner of her memory. She did not want them to come back again. When the red light disappeared, her beautiful face finally returned to its usual calmness. She smiled with satisfaction and fell into a deep sleep. There was a sea of people. It was a splendid sight. The engagement ceremony between the Devil Lord and the most powerful hermit in the celestial kingdom naturally shocked the entire 6 realms. Early in the morning, the inside and outside of Mo Palace was already a world of people. People from all 6 realms came and went in and out of the palace. Almost all the leaders of the 6 realms were present. The Devil Lord liked peace and quiet, and didn't like too much noise and excitement. Therefore, the people who could enter the Mo Palace to congratulate the Devil Lord were all of relatively high status. Those whose ranks were too low would at most send their gifts to the door before they were sent away. The place where the engagement ceremony was held was not a palace, but a large square paved with jade. The plaza could hold thousands of people. At this moment, a jade platform was erected in the middle of the plaza. This platform was made of red agate, and it shone brightly under the sunlight. Around the high platform, there were countless seats arranged according to rank and color. The seats were divided into 6 colors, and the guests from the 6 realms were seated in their respective seats. The immortal realms sat in the white row, the devil realms sat in the red row, the ghost realms sat in the black row, the demon realm sat in the green row, the human realm sat in the blue row, and the beast realm sat in the yellow row. At the very front of each row were the leaders of the various realms. If one were to look down from the sky, the 6 colors were neat and orderly. It was a magnificent sight. When it was almost noon, there were no empty seats in the square. Nearly 10,000 people had gathered there. The scene could no longer be described as shocking. In this engagement ceremony, some people were happy, while others were sad. The immortal world was relieved and happy, while the devil world was elated. As for the other 4 realms, some were indifferent. For example, the human realm and the ghost realm. Whether the immortal realm and the devil realm were like family or like fire and water, it had nothing to do with them. They were just there to watch. The honorable emperor of the human realm did not receive any special treatment when he came here. He even had to act according to the mood of others. Chapter 1602. On the other hand, the demons and beasts were a little worried. They were afraid that after the immortals and demons joined forces, they would come to deal with them. Their days might be even more difficult. Whether they were willing or not, they still had to participate in this event. When the bell rang in the distance, the ceremonial officer on the high platform finally shouted, "Venerable Linghua has arrived." Venerable Linghua was Yi Tianli's title. He rode a hexagonal red flame beast and floated down, standing on the high platform. As soon as he landed, he won the cheers of the guests around him. Because it was an engagement, although he did not need to wear the red groom's red robe, he wore a purple robe to show the importance of this event. His appearance was unusually handsome, with sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, a high nose and thin lips, and a white jade hairpin on his head. Purple represented luxury, and his purple robe was specially made. It had wide sleeves, and when it was opened, it looked like a purple cloud. A white jade pendant hung on his belt, shining brightly. In order to control the situation, he released his rare aura. The immortal aura on his body was awe-inspiring, and there seemed to be auspicious light lingering around his body. The moment he landed, it seemed that the coral-red high platform beneath him had lost its color. Although he looked like a man in his 20s, everyone knew that his actual age was more than 10,000 years old. His martial arts were top-notch in the immortal world, not below the Celestial Emperor. Coupled with his handsome appearance, no matter where he went, he could cause a sensation. At this moment, there were many unmarried girls below the stage. When they saw him like this, many of them were already starry-eyed. The girls from the demon world were more shrewish, and they had already started cheering loudly. Yi Tianli's thin lips curved slightly. He was obviously used to this scene. Neither servile nor overbearing, he bowed in a circle and said some polite words that could only be said in such an occasion. His voice was as clear as jade, and it reverberated throughout the square, pushing the atmosphere of the scene to a climax. Yi Tianli was calm on the surface, but he was still a little proud in his heart. Not everyone could handle this kind of situation. Look at the Celestial Emperor. When he looked at him, there seemed to be a light of envy in his eyes. The demon lord was the ruler of this world. To be able to marry her was a challenge and a pride. In the entire 6 realms, she was probably the only one who could match him. His suave attitude naturally won him another wave of cheers. Everyone was quite excited. After all, such a grand event was not something that could be seen every year. Everyone couldn't help but look towards the depths of Mo Palace. She wondered how the Devil Lord, who had been in the limelight recently, would dress up this time. What kind of demeanor would he have? Although the Devil Lord had been reincarnated for 3 years, she had not shown her face much in public, and the number of people who had seen her face was even fewer. Although there were rumors describing her appearance, seeing was better than hearing 100 times. Everyone still wanted to see for themselves. Just as everyone was waiting expectantly, the ceremonial officer shouted again, "The Devil Lord has arrived." His shouts resounded through the sky, and even the white clouds floating in the sky seemed to tremble. Everyone looked in a certain direction, and then their eyes widened. A woman in red arrived on a cloud. The red-clothed girl looked to be around 13 or 14 years old. She was wearing a simple red dress. She didn't ride a flashy divine beast, nor did she wear any luxurious accessories. Her beautiful hair fluttered in the wind, and her red dress fluttered behind her. Nurtured in the stone. Wouldn't that mean he was born from heaven and earth? Normally, this kind of child was a genius who could seize the good fortune of heaven and earth. The Celestial Emperor of the Celestial World stared intently at the child. He could vaguely see a faint light enveloping the child's body. That light was like a celestial yet not celestial, like a demon yet not a demon. It was very strange. The Celestial Emperor really wanted to take a good look at this child. He stood up and bowed to the Devil Master. "Devil Master, why don't you let me hold this child for you first? It would be inconvenient to hold him during the engagement ceremony." "No. I don't want an uncle to hold me. I only want my mother to hold me," Shen Yanma immediately said. The Celestial Emperor was speechless. He still looked like a young man. How did he become an uncle? Chapter 1604. The Celestial Emperor was speechless. He still looked like a young man, right? How did he become an uncle? Mo casually said, "It is just a ceremony. I can handle it if you want to carry him." The little guy cried so much yesterday, and today, he kept clinging to her and insisted that she carry him. It was rare for her to feel guilty about the child, so she carried him. She did not take the engagement ceremony seriously. It was just a formality. Carrying the child was nothing. She did everything according to her heart. If she liked it, she would do it. If she did not like it, she would not do it. She did not have the concept of good and evil. Since she was so insistent, no one dared to force her. Although Yi Tianli was unhappy, he could not say anything else. He looked up at the sky and gently said, "Ah Mo, shall we start?" Ah Mo nodded. Okay. Yi Tianli immediately signaled to the officiator. The officiator nodded and went to prepare. Shen Yanma was anxious. He looked around desperately. Why was his father not here yet? If his father did not come, his mother would not want him anymore. The engagement ceremony in this continent was different from other places. They needed to worship the heavens and earth. They also needed to pour the rootless water into the wine glass. The man and woman who were going to be engaged had to drip their blood into the glass and mix it with the wine. The man and woman shook the glass together. When the liquid in the glass was completely mixed, they used a spell to pour the wine on the ground. The bigger the area, the better. Yi Tianli felt that with his and Ah Mo's kung fu, the wine would definitely turn into a rain of wine. It would be the best story in history. During the engagement ceremony, the fresher the rootless water, the better. It was best to get it on the spot at the beginning of the ceremony. That would be perfect. The rootless water could be collected by the officiator or by the man himself. It depended on the man's kung fu. This time, Yi Tianli naturally wanted to collect it himself. The officiator brought him a jade container that was specially used to collect the rootless water. The container was specially made. It was green like jade, and the shape was also antique. Yi Tianli took it in his hand and raised it high above his head. Under his sleeve, he cast a spell and murmured. After a while, clouds began to accumulate above his head, gradually forming a rain cloud. After a while, rain finally fell from the rain cloud. As the rain continued to fall, Yi Tianli spun in the air to catch the falling raindrops. In less than half a cup of tea's time, he finally caught half of the jade container. When he caught the raindrops, his movements were graceful, and his purple robe swayed, earning him another round of applause. Admiration flashed in the eyes of the praising officer who often presided over ceremonies. He often caught this kind of rootless water, but in order to summon the rain clouds, it would take at least the time of an incense stick to burn for the raindrops to fall. Moreover, he could not catch all the raindrops that fell, so some of them would fall on the host's high platform. However, not a single drop fell from Yi Tianli. There was not a single drop of rain on the ground either. Other than the fact that there was a little too much rootless water in the jade container, there were no other flaws. It was perfect. Yi Tianli stood still. He looked at the cup calmly and smiled. Ah Mo, I did not disappoint you. She slowly walked to Ah Mo's side. We can begin now. He flicked his fingertip, and a drop of blood flew high into the air and fell into the wineglass-shaped container. Ah Mo's eyes fell on the cup. She slightly hesitated. She raised her fingertip and was about to flick a drop of blood when Shen Yanma, who was in her arms, suddenly sneezed. Chapter 1605. Apparently, Yi Tianli was not prepared for this. He was waiting for Ah Mo's blood to drip into the glass, so he could not avoid it and let a few drops of saliva into the glass. Shen Yanma's sneeze was so powerful that it even made the liquid in the glass ripple. Yi Tianli was speechless. Ah Mo was speechless. All the guests were speechless. Yi Tianli's hand that was hidden in his sleeve was trembling. He was willing to bet that this kid did it on purpose. His handsome face was a little pale, but he could not lose his temper in front of a child in public. Shen Yanma looked at him innocently and even rubbed his nose with his little hand. He muttered, "My nose is itchy." Ah Mo raised her hand to touch his forehead. It was cool, and there were no signs of fever. She looked at the kid again and saw that he had already hugged her neck and put his head on her neck. He rubbed his head against her neck and said, "Mother, I feel dizzy." This kid's little face was tender, and his soft breath blew on her neck, making her heart warm. She wanted to scold him, but she swallowed back her words. Instead, she raised her hand and patted his back. "Be good." Yi Tianli could not say anything else at this time. The liquid needed to be worshipped and could not be blasphemed. There was a child's saliva in the glass, so it was considered dirty and could not be used again. He had to pour the liquid away and used the cleaning spell to clean the glass. Then, he cast the spell again. Shen Yanma was still in his mother's arms. He was still very anxious. Where did his father go? Why was he not here yet? If he delayed any longer, the bad man who wanted to take his mother away would make the second glass. He could not sneeze again, could he? Moreover, Yi Tianli would certainly be prepared. He was afraid that the same trick would not work. Should he wait for Yi Tianli to bring the glass again and pee when he was not prepared? But he was not wearing open crotch pants. Shen Yanma was very troubled. He thought about it again and decided not to care anymore. If he could not do it, he would pee. Although he would wet his pants, his mother's clothes would also be wet. She had virgin urine on her body, so he could not hold the damn ceremony again. It was just a little embarrassing to wet his pants in public. Shen Yanma felt that he was going all out for the sake of the reunion of the three of them in the future. Just as he was desperately trying to come up with a bad idea, Yi Tianli finally finished his second cup. This time, he was obviously on guard against Shen Yanma. After he dripped his own blood into the bowl, he deliberately leaned to one side when he brought the bowl to Amo. He pinched his fingertips to prevent the little guy from sneezing again. Amo, it's done this time. Come, drip your blood in too. From now on, we're husband and wife. Amo raised his finger. Shen Yanma immediately closed his eyes and was about to urinate. Chee! A soft sound was heard. A white light flew out of nowhere and hit Yi Tianli's wine glass. Paw! The wine cup instantly shattered into a pile of dregs that couldn't be picked up. Yi Tianli was speechless. Why was there so much trouble today? He suddenly raised his head and shouted angrily, "Who is it?" Everyone was also shocked by the sudden appearance of the white light. The speed of the white light was too fast. Even with so many people present, no one could see where the white light came from. "It's me." A voice came from the clouds. The voice was as cold as snow and as clear as jade. A short word was like an ice bead that heavily plucked the strings of everyone's heart. Chapter 1606. It's me. A voice came from the clouds. That voice was as cold as snow and as clear as jade. That one word was like an ice bead that plucked at everyone's heartstrings. Following this voice, a white figure floated down from the sky. Jade as the spirit, snow as the bones, clouds as the clothes, and the moon as the face. When the white figure landed on the high platform, it was as if the whole world had become cool. His wide white robe fluttered behind him like a cloud, and his ink-black hair fluttered like a curtain. A deep sapphire headband was faintly discernible in his hair. He landed there calmly, and the beauty of his facial features seemed to be unable to be described with words. His eyes were like the waves of the sea, and his thin lips were like a cloud of peonies. Every curve was perfect. When his eyes turned, it was as if the waves of the sea were gently patting him. Everyone who looked at him felt their hearts beat up and down like a drum. He just casually glanced down, but everyone felt like they were being stared at. The men all shivered, and the women all felt their hearts beat wildly. His temperament was extremely cold, like the clouds in the high sky, like the ice on the high mountains. He was just casually standing there, but he exuded a noble and lofty aura. This aura seemed to come from his bones, and even if people didn't know his identity, they would still have the urge to kneel down and worship him. Silence. Extreme silence. In the big square, there were nearly 10,000 people. At this moment, everyone was completely silent. Almost everyone held their breath. It was as if breathing out was blasphemous to the person on the high platform. No matter how bold a woman was, she would not dare to scream. When this person landed, everything in the world seemed to automatically become his background. General Manager Himu stood below the stage with his mouth wide open. This person. Where did he come from? He was not a guest at all. Although there were many guests and he could not recognize them all, such a super existence would cause a sensation no matter where he appeared, right? It was impossible for him not to know. More importantly, he faintly felt that this person was a little familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. Yi Tianli's eyes fell on the man who suddenly appeared. His pupils shrank slightly. He had never seen this person before. But when he was on guard, he could still easily break the jade in his palm. This man's martial arts were not simple. It could almost be described as unfathomable. This person was obviously here to cause trouble, and in such a high-profile way. Yi Tianli's 2 consecutive drinks were ruined by someone and he was in a bad mood. Especially when this man appeared and took away everyone's attention, it made him even more unhappy. Yi Tianli had always been good at self-restraint. As the First Lord in the Celestial Kingdom, it was necessary to have good self-restraint. Therefore, although he was very unhappy in his heart, he still showed a calm expression on his face. He was neither anxious nor impatient. Who are you? What's the meaning of breaking my cup? His voice was gentle and sharp. He stood there in his purple robe and subconsciously released his aura. He was not much weaker than the man in front of him. Father. He is my father. Shen Yanma, who was in Ah Mo's arms, finally called out. His crisp and soft voice echoed throughout the square. He was extremely excited. His father had finally arrived. He finally didn't need to use a virgin boy's urine to force his mother to go back and change clothes. He waved his little hands and was so happy that his eyes turned into crescent moons. He was so happy that he almost flew into the air. Yi Tianli was speechless. How could a child who jumped out of a rock have a father? Chapter 1607. Naturally, he did not take Shen Yanma's words to heart. He stared at the man in white and asked, "Who are you?" The man in white was Shen Jiuli. He smiled faintly and looked at Shen Yanma. The child called me father. Shen Yanma added, "He is my biological father." He proudly raised his little head and hugged Ah Mo's neck to ask again, "Isn't that right, mother?" Father, mother, child, these names were like a bomb that shocked everyone present. Everyone's expression could only be expressed with one word, 0. Yi Tianli paused and smiled. So, you are the child's godfather. It seems that when he was in the stone, you were the one who took care of him. This is nothing. May I know why you are here this time? Are you here to take the child back? He tried his best to smooth things over, trying to dissolve the increasingly strange atmosphere. Shen Jiuli was too lazy to pay attention to him. His eyes fell on Ah Mo and smiled. It has been a long time since we last met. How have you been? His voice was soft and low, as pleasant as a guqin. It was also like the spring breeze blowing through the treetops. It warmed people's hearts in an instant. Ah Mo tilted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were deep and clear like glass. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was as indifferent as usual. Who are you? After this sentence, the atmosphere became even more awkward. Everyone was guessing the man's identity and the cause of the whole incident. Naturally, at this time, everyone's gossipy cells began to be activated. They had already imagined a melodramatic drama. Shinjuli's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a flash of sadness in his eyes, but he smiled. You don't know. Well, there is still a long way to go. It is not too late for us to get to know each other again. His words were filled with an invisible domineering aura and determination to win, which made the people below the stage shocked again. Amo smiled lazily and was not moved. What qualifications do you have for me to get to know each other again? Shin Nyenma quickly said, Mother, he is Nyenma's father. He should also be your husband. Mother, you have to acknowledge him. He has worked very hard to find you for a long time. Nyenma has also worked very hard. Although the boy's words could not be trusted, there was too much information contained in his somewhat incoherent words. Everyone felt that it would take them a while to digest. Amo looked at Shinjuli again and suddenly smiled. So you're here to find a wife. Unfortunately, I'm not the one you're looking for. Although I was the one who delivered this child, he is not my flesh and blood. If he is indeed your child, you can take him with you. She handed Shin Nyenma over to Gu Shijo. Shin Nyenma's facial expression changed, and he cried again. He turned around and desperately held Almo's arm. Mother, do you always like to abandon me? Mother promised not to abandon Nyenma again. His tears came as he wished, rolling down like pearls. Amo could be cruel to anyone, but she could not resist the tears of this little ancestor. She originally wanted to throw the little brat to the man who claimed to be his father, but when he cried, her heart softened slightly. She hesitated for a moment, and the little brat had already grabbed her arm. His two little hands held on tightly, and she couldn't shake him off even if she wanted to. She would have to use a spell, but she couldn't use it on this little brat. Therefore, the little ancestor naturally lay on her body again. He hugged her like a koala and could not be pulled away. Chapter 1608. This scene made the demon master lose a lot of face. Mo's calm mask almost cracked. Shut up. Don't cry. She yelled at him. Shin Nyenma's little body trembled, and he looked at her with tears in his eyes. Mother, you are scolding me. His little mouth was pouting more and more, and his tears were about to turn into a downpour. Nyenma, be a good boy. If you are a man, don't cry. Amo finally understood that children should not be scolded, especially this boy. Otherwise, he would cry until there was a river in the sky. She changed it to education. This sentence was almost blurted out. Shin Nyenma was a docile donkey. Once his hair was smoothed, he was very obedient. The tears that were about to roll out of his eyes finally showed signs of recovery. Well, Mother has taught me before that only girls like to cry, and boys should be men. They bleed but not cry. It wasn't as if this brat didn't understand reason. Amo finally breathed a sigh of relief. It is good that you know. Don't cry. Shin Nyenma rubbed his face against her chest. As long as you don't abandon me, I will not cry. I will be a man. This boy was not an ordinary person who changed the rudder according to the wind. He even knew how to threaten. Mo's head swelled from his rubbing. For a moment, he couldn't decide whether to continue throwing him out or not. She regretted bringing this boy to the scene. Hugging him in her arms, her dignity was almost gone. No matter how good Yi Tianli was, at this time, his handsome face was gloomy. He coughed softly. Mo, we don't have to care about irrelevant people. Let's continue with the engagement ceremony. Mo closed her eyes slightly. When she opened her eyes again, she was already at ease. She casually pointed at Shen Nianma's body a few times, and in front of Shen Nianma's big eyes, she encircled him in a light red wizardry barrier and suspended him behind her. She flicked her clothes as if she was trying to get rid of the irrelevant people and things. She smiled gently. Okay. Her smile was sweet, but there was an indescribable evil aura. It made people who saw her smile feel nervous. Yi Tianli finally let out a sigh of relief. As long as Amo agreed to marry him, everything else was fine. The Celestial Emperor of the Celestial World finally reacted. He stood up and said, "That's right. Today is the big day of the Devil Lord and the Supremacy's engagement. Don't miss the auspicious time. In any case, the marriage between the Immortal Realm and the Demon Lord was the only way to bring peace to the 6 realms." As for the white-robed man who appeared later, although his bearing was also extraordinary, his origins were unknown. No one could even tell where he came from. The Celestial Realm naturally didn't want him to ruin this great marriage. Therefore, when the Celestial Emperor spoke, the people from the other immortal realms immediately agreed. This time, many people from the immortal realms had come to support the Celestial Emperor. Their agreement had a shocking effect. Yi Tianli straightened his back and glanced at Shinjiuli proudly. He wanted to see if Shinjiuli would restrain himself after being isolated. It would be best if Shinjiuli left obediently. Shinjiuli stood there. He didn't feel uneasy about being isolated in this world. His face was as calm as water. He looked down at the crowd and echoed loudly. His eyes were like ice water. Under the baptism of his gaze, those who were loudly echoing unconsciously lowered their voices. Finally, they all shut up. Shinjiuli finally opened his mouth to speak after the restless voices had died down. If Your Excellency wants to compete, why don't you wait for me to complete this ceremony before choosing another day to compete with Your Excellency? He was also very cunning. His words were not degrading, and he could continue to complete the engagement ceremony without being criticized by others. Shinjiuli's lips curled up. How could he not see through Yi Tianli's scheme? Since the Demon Lord wants to be engaged to the strongest person, how can you complete this engagement ceremony now that your identity as the strongest person has not been confirmed? Do you take the Demon Lord's oath as a joke? Shinjiuli did not bicker with others easily. In his opinion, it was best to act quickly. Chapter 1610. Shinjiuli was not one to bicker with others easily. In his opinion, the fastest way was to act. However, just because he did not want to bicker with others did not mean that he would not say anything. Once he opened his mouth, his words would be as straightforward as his personality. It would be impossible for others to ignore him even if they wanted to. Yi Tianli was speechless. He could not find the words to refute him. Shinjiuli took another step forward. Or do you think that you are no match for me and do not dare to accept the challenge? Yi Tianli took a deep breath and snorted. You are just trying to provoke me. I will not. He was about to marry his wife and he did not want to add unnecessary variables. That's right, that's right. Venerable Yi is recognized as the strongest. There's really no need to waste time by competing with others. If at this time, a few people casually come up and say that they want to challenge Venerable Yi, wouldn't it be a mess? In my opinion, it is more important to hold the ceremony first. Don't miss the auspicious time. The Heaven Emperor also stood up for Yi Tianli. Are you afraid of missing the auspicious time? Shinjiuli looked up at the sun that was about to move to the middle of the sky and smiled faintly. It won't be missed. He waved his sleeve and a faint white light instantly enveloped the entire place. After the white light dissipated, everyone stared at the hourglass not far away. The hourglass had stopped flowing and the treetops in the distance were tilted to one side as if they were frozen. Everything that was moving came to a standstill in an instant. Even the rolling clouds in the sky stopped there, not moving at all. The only thing that could move was the people present. Everyone looked at each other, not understanding what had happened. The Heaven Emperor's eyes were almost fixed on Shinjioli. You are, time has stopped, Shinjioli said slowly. Before the outcome of the battle is decided, the auspicious hour will not come. When he was with Ning Xuemo, she unintentionally mentioned the movie, You from the Stars, that she watched in the modern world. She said that the professors in the movie were able to stop time. She only mentioned it at that time, but it aroused his interest. Therefore, he took Ning Xuemo to travel and train her while studying the time-stop technique on his own. He was a god, and there were very few spells in this world that could truly baffle him. As long as he researched, there was no spell that he could not succeed. After he finished his research, he didn't even have time to show it off in front of Ning Xuemo before the following incident happened. Now, he finally used it at such a crucial moment. His cold voice resounded throughout the entire place, causing everyone to be stunned. The leaders of the 6 realms looked at each other, the word shock could be seen on their faces. There was no one on this continent who could use this technique. Who was this man? He actually knew such a powerful spell. Originally, they were still suspicious of Shinjioli's challenge to Yi Tianli. They thought that this person was just here to cause trouble and delay the auspicious hour. Now that he had revealed this move, everyone finally took it seriously. The leaders of the demon realm and the beast realm were eager to ruin this marriage, so they immediately said, "This brother's words are reasonable. Why don't Venerable Yi compete with this brother? That way, everyone will be convinced." Yes, the demon lord is marrying the strongest person. If Venerable Yi doesn't accept the challenge, I'm afraid people will not be convinced. Haha, yes, we haven't seen Venerable Yi show his skills for a long time. Anyway, time is still now, so there's no need to worry about missing the auspicious hour. Why don't Venerable Yi fight with this brother? Chapter 1611. At this point, Yi Tianli could no longer find any other excuses. He looked at Shinjioli and said, "All right. I will fight. However, fists and kicks have no eyes. If I accidentally hurt you, please forgive me." Shinjioli was straightforward, "Just do whatever you want." It had been a long time since he had a good fight with someone. A life without an opponent was a lonely life. Hopefully, Yi Tianli lived up to his title as the strongest person in the continent and could withstand a little beating. He had been unhappy with him for a long time. Almost everyone was excited to see a heavyweight fight at the engagement ceremony. Yi Tianli waved his hand and the loose purple robe on his body was thrown to the side. Inside, he was wearing a tight green robe. It looked like he had slender shoulders and narrow buttocks, which made his body look even more slender and straight like a bamboo. Shinjioli rolled up his sleeves and tucked in the corner of his robe. He waved the jade flute in his hand and said, "What does the strongest person want to compete with?" Yi Tianli snorted and said, "Whether it's swordsmanship, spells, or even zither skills, I am willing to accompany you." Shinjioli's eyes flashed slightly. He discussed with him, "Why don't we compete with each other? No matter which one you win, you win. How about it?" Yi Tianli was speechless. He was also a very proud and conceited person. He had never met a real opponent on this continent. Of course, the Devil Lord was an exception. The Devil Lord was the ruler of this world. It was not embarrassing for him to lose to her. However, who was this man in white in front of him? He did not even know where he came from. Shinjioli's words were like a slap to his face. Yi Tianli said angrily, "Since I have agreed to compete with you, it must be fair. I don't need you to go easy on me. I just want to end this battle quickly. You can choose one. Shinjuli said calmly, no matter what I choose, you won't stand a chance if it's decided in one battle. He looked at Yi Tianli from head to toe and finally looked at him. What are you best at? Yi Tianli was speechless. The person opposite him spoke calmly, but Yi Tianli felt deeply humiliated. There were people below the stage who liked to join in the fun. One of them, who was beaten up badly by Yi Tianli, immediately shouted, Venerable Yi is best at swordsmanship. Shinjuli nodded. Then let's go with the sword. Yi Tianli looked at the long sword hanging on Shinjuli's waist and smiled. Are you going to use that sword to compete with me? Shinjuli stroked the hilt of his sword and raised his eyebrows. So what? Yi Tianli smiled coldly. In this continent, there were many sword immortals who practiced sword arts. Anyone who had learned something would be able to cultivate an immortal sword. The immortal sword would change its size according to the person's will and could be placed anywhere. Only those who had yet to become immortals would wear swords on their bodies. Therefore, when Yi Tianli saw Shinjuli's outfit, he could not help but laugh. After all, he had lived in this continent for tens of thousands of years and was very knowledgeable. He could see that the sword hanging on Shinjuli's waist was indeed a sharp sword, but it was not an immortal sword. If Yi Tianli used this sword to compete with him, he could break it in minutes. Yi Tianli raised his hand and a light flashed in his palm. A green glazed sword appeared out of nowhere. The sword was thin and sharp, shining like a lake under the sunlight. He smiled. This is the sword that I used before I became immortal. Since you are using an ordinary sword, I will also use the worst one, lest you say that I took advantage of you. Chapter 16:12. Shinjuli glanced at his sword. Once he decided to fight, he spoke little. Whatever. No matter what his opponent's sword was, it would be destroyed anyway. The Sky Emperor suddenly spoke up. Since you're here to fight for the title of the strongest, you should leave your name. Shinjuli raised his head and looked at Amo, who had been watching from afar. She looked calm and casual, as if she had nothing to do with the dispute that started because of her. Her gaze fell on him, without joy, sorrow, or hatred. It was as if she was looking at a stranger. She had no intention of speaking up for him. She stood there in her red dress. She was clearly in a sea of people, but she seemed to be isolated from the world. It was as if nothing in this world had anything to do with her. His heart twisted slightly. The two people who had once loved each other the most were now strangers. So this was what it felt like to be forgotten by the one you loved. He seemed to understand how Ning Xuemo felt when he woke up and saw her again. Shinjuli. He spat out 3 words. No matter which world he was in, he would only remember this name. The Sky Emperor's expression changed. He stared at him with wide eyes. You, the story of the gods and demons had been lost for too long. Now, very few people in this world still remembered the names of the 2 gods and demons. Even at that time, the common people only called the pair of gods Supreme God and Demon Master. Very few people knew their real names. Occasionally, people would hear that the demon lord called himself Amo, but no one knew his real name. Although Amo had been reborn, she did not remember the events of tens of thousands of years ago. She only remembered that her nickname was Amo, so she called herself that. As for the Supreme God, only the Sky Emperor, the ruler of the immortal world, knew his real name. However, he only knew one word, and that was Li. He did not know anything else. Now, this man in white was called Shinjuli. Was he related to the Supreme God? Was he his descendant? Or was he the Supreme God himself? No. The Supreme God had also been immortalized in that great battle. The Devil Lord's rebirth shook the heavens and the earth. There was no reason why the rebirth of a God Lord would not cause any strange phenomena. The Sky Emperor stood there in bewilderment. He could not figure out Shinjuli's identity, but he began to worry for Yi Tianli. He lowered his eyes slightly and cupped his hands at the Devil Master. I wonder what the Devil Master thinks about the competition between these two. Imo crossed his arms and smiled lazily. I've already said that I will only marry the strongest. This vow will not change. Life is so boring. If there's a good show to watch, it'll relieve my boredom. Celestial Arch, he thought that the Demon Lord and Yi Tianli had been together for so long that they would have feelings for each other and would side with Yi Tianli. He did not expect that. Yi Tianli's face turned slightly pale, and his heart was a little bitter. He had been with her for more than a year, and yet he was unable to make her fall in love with him. It was also a failure. Shinjuli's gaze fell on Imo, and a trace of sadness flashed through his eyes. He was not afraid of her hatred, nor was he afraid of her giving him a hard time. He was only afraid that she would treat him like a stranger. If she still hated him, she would definitely not agree to this competition. In order to anger him, she might even stubbornly insist on marrying Shinjuli. At the very least, she would not agree to let Shinjuli marry her again, but she did not care now. Chapter 16:13. She had completely forgotten about him. The Sky Emperor coughed softly and said, "Since the Demon Lord has said so, it means that you agree to this competition. I think that in order to be fair, it's better to have 2 out of 3 rounds. We can't decide the winner in 1 round. Onlookers would never complain about too much trouble." As soon as he said this, everyone naturally agreed and wanted to watch a few more rounds. The Demon Lord Imo also seemed to be interested. She nodded and said, "Then let's have 2 out of 3 rounds." She had the highest status now, so this sentence naturally made the final decision. Yi Tianli was actually angry just now, that's why he said 1 round to decide the winner. He was also afraid that if the person in front of him was a sword master, he would lose and everything would be over. Originally, when he competed with other people, there were also several skills. The Demon Lord's husband naturally could not only be good at one. Shinjuli did not care about the number of rounds. He had lived for a long time and had studied almost everything. However, he had a bad habit. No matter what he learned, he wanted to be the best. He would only stop when there was no room for further research. Although he lost his memory once every few hundred years, he would not lose the skills he learned. Subconsciously, he would still do it. Therefore, there were very few things in this world that he did not know. Now that someone proposed 2 out of 3 rounds, he naturally had no objections. It was just a few more rounds of torture, he had no objections. Since the parties involved had no objections, this matter was settled. Since the heads of the 6 realms happened to be here, they just happened to be witnesses for these 2 people. The first round was naturally a sword competition. Even if they were to fight, it could not be held on the high platform where the engagement ceremony was held. Yi Tianli waved his hand and summoned the red flame beast. He flew into the air. His red flame beast was very majestic. When it flew into the air, it was like a cloud in the sky, extremely dazzling. Before the competition, he had already won a round of applause, especially the cheers from the immortal realm were louder. Shinjuli slowly rolled up his sleeves, then slowly looked at the people below the stage. He slowly flew into the air and finally stopped in front of the red flame beast. He glanced at the majestic red flame beast and praised, "This red flame beast is not bad." Yi Tianli gritted his teeth and laughed, "You flatter me." Shinjuli looked at him strangely. "I'm praising it, not you. You don't have to be modest for it." Yi Tianli, he didn't want to talk to this person anymore, in case he was angered to death. He raised his hand, and the treasured sword flew into the air with a swoosh. The tip of the sword spat out a sword ray that was about 3 feet long. His etiquette was still very thorough, and he also raised his sword in a starting position. He said in a deep voice, "Please." His starting stance was extremely standard, and extremely stylish. Those who knew swordsmanship cheered again. This was how a supremacy of the celestial world should be. "You have the ability." Looking at Shinjuli again, he was standing there casually, looking very casual. He also pulled out his sword, but the way he held it was not up to standard. He casually held the sword, but he did not let it fly into the air, nor did he let it be held horizontally as a sign of respect. He held it more like he was holding an iron rod, and the tip of the sword was even hanging down. "No need to be polite, let's fight." Yi Tianli was speechless. He had fought so many times, but this was the first time he met such an opponent who did not play by the rules. Especially the opponent's attitude, it was obvious that he did not take him seriously. Chapter 16-14. He was a venerable of the immortal world, while his opponent was just a white robe that popped out of nowhere. He did not even have an identity. Yi Tianli felt that it was beneath him to compete with him. Naturally, he would not make the first move. Moreover, he was very confident in his swordsmanship. After all, he had defeated countless swordsmen. God knows how many people cried for their parents. He now had the intention to kill Shinjuli. The more he wanted to kill, the more gentlemanly he would be. Therefore, he smiled slightly. "I will give you 3 moves. After 3 moves, he would be able to kill everyone. No one would say anything even if he turned this person into a human stick." Although Shinjuli did not have many opportunities to fight in his life, every fight he fought was shocking and earth-shattering. After so many fights, he had always been the one who gave others 3 moves. Now, someone actually wanted to give him a handicap. He felt that it was quite strange. He held his sword and looked at the first person who dared to eat crabs. "Do you really want to give me a handicap?" "Of course." Yi Tianli answered firmly. He squinted his eyes and looked at Shinjuli. He thought that Shinjuli would have a humiliated expression on his face, or that he would refute him angrily. If it was more intense, this opponent might proudly say that he would give him a handicap of 3 moves. Of course, the most gentlemanly way would be for Shinjuli to make 3 slashes in the air to show that his opponent gave him a handicap. Then, the fight would officially start. Yi Tianli felt that with Shinjuli's character, the possibility of him taking the last step was probably the highest. However, he obviously misjudged Shinjuli's attitude. Shinjuli did not have a trace of anger on his face. He even smiled and praised him. "You have courage. Then I won't hold back." He raised the sword in his hand and stabbed it out. His sword did not have any fancy movements. The only characteristic was that it was fast. It was unprecedentedly fast. Even lightning could not compare to his speed at this moment. Just as he finished speaking, the tip of the sword in his hand was already pointing at Yi Tianli's forehead. Shinjuli's sword did not even have a dazzling sword aura, but the murderous aura on the sword was sharper than the edge of the sword. Before the fierce sword aura even reached Yi Tianli's eyes, it had already caused him pain as if his skin was being torn apart. Yi Tianli was indeed worthy of being called the strongest person in this continent. His reaction was not ordinary. When the opponent's sword was about to reach him, he subconsciously bent down. Suddenly, he felt a chill on the top of his head. The green jade hairpin on his head instantly broke into 2 pieces. His flowing hair instantly fell down like flowing water. This was because his reaction was extremely fast. If his reaction was slightly slower, his hair would have been shaved bald. He took a few steps back like flowing water, and his palms were already sweating. The strongest person on the continent had her hairpin severed in a single move. Everyone who was watching the battle below sucked in a breath of cold air. Almost everyone's eyes were focused on Shinjuli. Almost everyone present was an expert in martial arts. Naturally, they were able to see Shinjuli's move clearly. It was a very common move. Almost everyone present knew how to use it, but no one could achieve the same effect as Shinjuli. It was light and agile. It was indescribable. No one would have thought that this move could be used in such a way. It could also be so powerful. Good. Finally, someone shouted. Father, cut him. Shin Yenma, who was trapped in the wizardry barrier, could finally speak. This was the first sentence that came out of his mouth. Mo glanced at him sideways. She was annoyed that he was too noisy, so she casually sealed his acupoints. Of course, the opponent was a child, so she was very gentle. She only sealed his acupoint slightly, but it did not affect his body. Chapter 16:15. Yi Tianli was very quiet after his acupuncture point was sealed. He sat in the enchantment without crying or making a fuss. He only opened his big eyes and watched the development of the situation outside. He was as obedient as a kitten. Mo was happy that Yi Tianli was finally obedient. He did not expect Yi Tianli to open his acupuncture point by himself. He even hurriedly shouted out such an important sentence. When Ning Xuema looked at him, he immediately sat up straight and pursed his lips. He was acting like an obedient child again. Of course, there were more people who were on Yi Tianli's side. At the very least, the immortal world shared the same hatred as him. Many people below shouted for him to be careful. Shinjuli automatically filtered out the voices below. He glanced at Yi Tianli. Your reaction is not slow. Shinjuli's comment was simple. Shinjuli rarely complimented others, so it was rare for him to praise Shinjuli. Yi Tianli's skill was still a little beyond Shinjuli's expectation. His move just now seemed ordinary, but in fact, it was his ultimate move. In this world, there were not many people who could withstand his move. Even if Shui Lan was here, if he used this move, he would probably suffer a great loss. But he did not expect Yi Tianli to be able to dodge in time and only lose a hairpin. This person was indeed very capable. If he trained well, he would be a real opponent. Shinjuli was sincerely praising him. Yi Tianli felt that he was greatly insulted. His handsome face turned green and white. His opponent's swordsmanship was far beyond his imagination. I did not expect you to be a swordsman. Yi Tianli took a light breath and did not dare to underestimate his opponent. Shinjuli nodded and took his words as a compliment. He asked honestly, are you still going to let me use the next two moves? I can give you a chance to change your mind. Yi Tianli. He knew in his heart that he could not let Yi Tianli go, but if he changed his mind now, the Sky Sovereign below said loudly, Lord Yi, this is a competition between the strongest. Since the other party has come to challenge you, you should treat him as an equal. This is respect for the other party. You don't have to give in anymore. Just fight seriously. His words naturally gave Yi Tianli a good excuse to step down. Yi Tianli finally heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He cupped his hands towards Shinjuli and said, if that's the case, I won't hold back anymore. Let's have a fair fight. Smart. Shinjuli praised him. You can make the first move this time. Yi Tianli made up his mind and attacked immediately. He was anxious to regain the face he had just lost, so he used his killer move right from the start. The green glazed sword transformed into countless swords in the air, chasing after Shinjuli like a whirlwind. The rain of swords that filled the sky was extremely beautiful. Chapter 16:16. But at such a close distance, these 36 swords looked exactly the same. How could it be easy to find the main sword? It could be said that it was a fool's dream. So after Yi Tianli made this move, he waited for a situation where there was a barrier to block it. His move also had a hidden function. Once it met a defensive barrier, it would automatically explode. The power of one sword's explosion was enough to directly blow a solid building into the sky. If all 35 swords exploded together, that would definitely be enough to make the person in front of him suffer. Even if the explosion did not kill him, it would at least break his barrier, tear his clothes, and embarrass him, taking revenge for the broken hairpin. His plan was very precise, but the person he met was Shinjioli, who did not play by the rules. Shinjioli did not set up any barrier at all. The moment the 36 swords attacked him, he raised the sword in his hand and directly slashed at one of the swords. Chi! With a sound, the long sword in Shinjioli's hand cut through the sword's tip, like cutting through tofu, directly to the sword's hilt. That sword had already cultivated into an immortal spirit. The moment it was struck, it let out an ear-piercing shriek, as if it was a scream before death. Before the shriek stopped, the immortal sword that had once swept through the 8 desolations was neatly split into 2 halves and fell to the ground. The main sword was cut, the other illusory swords naturally could not withstand it. Before they reached Shinjioli, they dissipated. Yi Tianli was stunned. His face turned pale. He did not expect that the opponent could see the difference between an illusory sword and a main sword in such a short time. He also did not expect that the opponent could destroy his immortal sword with a normal sword. Since it was an immortal sword, its spiritual root and its master had something in common. When the immortal sword was destroyed, Yi Tianli was also injured, the blood in his chest surged. Fortunately, he did not put much immortal core power into the sword, or else the injury would be more serious. Like a whirlwind, he retreated a few steps and looked at Shinjioli in bewilderment. You! He had already seen that Shinjioli's sword just now was still an ordinary sword, and it was a sword that everyone could use. It obviously didn't have many tricks, but he couldn't dodge it. Shinjioli did not follow up with another attack. He calmly flicked his sword and looked at Yi Tianli. You can change to another sword. Yi Tianli clenched his teeth and did not waste any more time. Instead, he took out the legendary sword that made him famous, the Heavenly Sword. It was an ink-black treasured sword. It was so black that no light could be reflected. Once the light hit its body, it seemed to be devoured. It looked strange and mysterious. The people below held their breaths when they saw him take out the sword. The Heavenly Sword, the most famous and ruthless immortal sword in the divine demon continent. Once the Heavenly Sword was taken out, it must see blood, eat souls, and never return to the scabbard. The sword spirit of this sword was very powerful. It could automatically attack without a master. The sword spirit of this sword was also very evil. Once it was taken out of the scabbard, it must see blood. No matter if it was an immortal or a demon, once it was defeated, it would eat the soul together with it. It could not even be reincarnated. This sword was originally used to deal with evil people. Yi Tianli had carried it with him for so many years, but the chances of him using it were few and far between. Who would have thought that he would take out this sword at this moment? This showed that Yi Tianli was really going all out. When the Heavenly Sword was taken out, the originally clear skies suddenly turned dark. Chapter 16:17. As soon as the Heavenly Sword appeared, the originally clear skies suddenly darkened. The white clouds turned into dark clouds, and there was a faint whistling sound in the air. Lightning flashed in the clouds and circled around the Heavenly Sword. Yi Tianli was shrouded in the light of the Heavenly Sword. His clothes were fluttering, and he looked like the god of war. Shinjioli squinted his eyes and looked at the heavenly sword. He vaguely felt that the sword seemed to be a little familiar. He was a knowledgeable person. Although he did not have any memory of living in this continent, he still had an instinctive understanding of some things. This sword seemed to be the ancestor of all swords. The sword spirit in it was a bloodthirsty master who would not be happy without blood. Yi Tianli looked at him coldly. Your origin is unknown. Let the heavenly sword test your strength. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with Shinjioli. He flicked his finger, and the heavenly sword buzzed. A hurricane came out from the sword and directly turned into countless black sword needles in the air. The sword needles combined again and transformed into a black dragon. As soon as the dragon was formed, a huge whirlpool formed in the sky. The roar of the dragon was earth-shattering as it pounced on Shinjioli. The dark clouds in the sky gathered and trapped Shinjioli in the middle in the blink of an eye. Father, be careful. Shin Nianma was frightened and shouted. He suddenly stood up in the wizardry barrier and directly rushed to the wall, wanting to break the barrier and jump out. However, he forgot that this wizardry barrier was set up by his mother. His mother's current kung fu was not comparable to a little boy like him. He did not break the wizardry barrier. Instead, he bounced himself out and sat there with a thud. Fortunately, the wizardry barrier was soft, so his forehead did not have a bruise. He did not care about the flying birds in front of him. He opened his eyes and looked up. He did not want anything to happen to his father. He wanted him to be well. Whether it was his father or his mother, he wanted them all. Not one of them could be missing. He was frightened and worried that he would see his father fall from the sky with blood all over his body. Even his eyelashes were trembling. However, when he saw what was happening in the sky, his eyes opened wider. Rounder. At first, the audience thought that they would see flesh and blood flying everywhere. Some of the more timid ones even closed their eyes. However, when they heard the sound of people gasping, they were obviously shocked to the extreme. Therefore, the timid ones opened their eyes and looked at the sky. They immediately opened their mouths and were speechless for a moment. In the sky, that ink-black dragon formed by sword needles flew in front of Shinjioli. However, Shinjioli did not draw his sword. He merely extended his middle finger and pointed it between the dragon's eyebrows. Such a ferocious, intrepid, and invincible black dragon could only shake its head and wag its tail. Like a puppy that had seen its master, it wagged its tail with all its might. Where was the slightest bit of might left? The original body of the heavenly sword was still in Yi Tianli's hand, but at this moment, it was shaking violently, as if it wanted to escape from its master's grasp. Yi Tianli's face was pale. He grabbed the sword hilt with all his might. The web between his thumb and forefinger was bleeding from the shaking. He desperately chanted a spell, trying to regain control of the sword. However, the sword seemed to have gone crazy. The ink-black sword suddenly lit up and a golden light burst out. Not good, this sword actually wanted to kill its master. The original sword hilt actually turned into a sharp blade that could cut through everything in an instant. If Yi Tianli did not let go, all 5 of his fingers would be cut off. Helplessly, he could only let go. The heavenly sword instantly flew out. Chapter 16:18. Helpless, he could only let go. The Heaven's Path sword instantly flew out and flew in front of Shinjioli like a whirlwind. Once the main sword arrived, the black dragon of sword needles instantly disappeared. Shinjioli's finger was on the main sword's tip. The Heaven's Path sword's tip actually transformed into a round head and trembled under Shinjioli's finger. Then, the sword automatically bent and coiled around Shinjioli's arm, rubbing against his arm like a snake. It was as if it had reunited with its owner after a long time. Where was the awe-inspiring aura from before? Shinjioli slowly retracted his hand. The sword immediately stuck close to him again. The sword hilt desperately squeezed into his palm, as if it was begging for him to caress and hold it. Shinjioli's left hand had just touched the head of the black dragon, while his right hand was still holding onto the moonlight sword. When the Heaven's Path sword came over, it desperately squeezed into his right hand, as if it couldn't wait to squeeze the moonlight sword out. It even let out a threatening dragon roar. It was the ancestor of swords. Any immortal or demon swords that had spirituality would be afraid of it and would automatically make way for it. It thought that the moonlight sword wouldn't fight with it and would obediently leave. However, it didn't expect that the moonlight sword was just an ordinary sword. It didn't have any spirituality, so even if the Heaven's Path sword came over, it still remained in its owner's hand. The Heaven's Path sword was furious. Its body suddenly lit up, like a leopard showing its fangs, and directly bit towards the moonlight sword. Very obviously, the Heaven's Path sword was an extremely jealous immortal sword. It wanted to take the lead. Before it could bite the moonlight sword, two snow-white fingers stretched out and clamped onto the Heaven's Path sword's body. The Heaven's Path sword trembled slightly and became obedient. It unwillingly retreated and circled around Shinjioli. Finally, it wormed its way into his left palm. Fearing that Shinjioli wouldn't hold on to it, it automatically turned into a circle and wrapped itself around Shinjioli's wrist. Yi Tianli's pale face was his current expression. Shock was the expression of the spectators below the stage. Everyone's mouth was slightly agape. Their expressions were like people in a peaceful world who saw a dinosaur flying in the sky. Good. Father, you are awesome. Shin Nianma jumped up again. He laughed and jumped in the wizardry barrier, causing it to tremble. Mother, isn't Father great? Mother, Lord Father is the strongest in this world. Everyone else, stand aside. Shin Nianma's little face was full of pride. His pair of big eyes sparkled as if they were about to shine. Amo pursed her lips and looked up at the sky. Her pretty face was expressionless, neither happy nor sad. Shinjioli casually grasped the heavenly Dao sword, and a familiar feeling spread through his heart. Countless images seemed to fly through his mind. Although he could not connect them together, there were a few images of the heavenly Dao sword. He couldn't remember anything else, and he didn't want to remember. However, he understood that the Heavenly Path sword had once belonged to him. He was its true master. The spirit of the sword had recognized its master, so the moment it recognized him, it immediately betrayed its new master and desperately wanted to return to him. At this moment, the Heavenly Path sword was tightly attached to his arm, making a buzzing sound similar to that of a small dragon. It seemed to be acting coquettishly and as if it was complaining. At this time, everyone also understood that Shinjioli was the original master of the Heavenly Path sword. Now, it had recognized its ancestors and returned to its master. Yi Tianli's hand was empty, and his face was pale. Looking at the Heavenly Path sword that had betrayed him, he was so shocked that he could not even say a word. Chapter 1619. The Heavenly Path sword was found by Yi Tianli in a deep valley a few thousand years ago. At that time, the Heavenly Path sword did not recognize him as its master. Because it was stuck in a crack, the sword was slightly rusty. Yi Tianli washed it with rootless water every day. The Heavenly Path sword was bloodthirsty, so Yi Tianli fed it a drop of blood every day. After a few times, the Heavenly Path sword was finally moved by him and reluctantly recognized him as its master. However, the Heavenly Path sword had its own personality and would not easily fight for Yi Tianli. It would only appear proudly when it met a truly powerful opponent. Moreover, it would throw a tantrum whenever it wanted to. Once it fought, it would be completely free. If it wanted to kill the opponent, it would kill the opponent. Even if Yi Tianli wanted to go easy on it, it would not be able to take it back in advance. This time, if he was not forced into a corner, he would not have taken out the Sword Ancestor. He did not expect the Sword Ancestor to leave him at this moment. What was even more unexpected was that the Sword Ancestor actually had such a servile side. After all, he had carried this sword with him for so many years and knew the power of this sword. Even if Shinjiuli did nothing and only took out this sword to fight with him, he might not be able to win. Moreover, this opponent was unfathomable. At this time, no matter how unwilling he was, he could only choose to admit defeat. Fortunately, admitting defeat at this time was not considered a loss. Yi Tianli's lips curled up and he cupped his hands toward Shinjiuli. My sword changed sides at the last moment. After all, it has followed me for so many years, how can I bear to attack it? Now, I can only. Before he could say the words admit defeat, Shinjiuli interrupted him, you don't have to admit defeat unwillingly. Although this sword is my old sword, I will not use it in this array. He shook his hand and the Heavenly Path sword that was desperately entangling his wrist disappeared. It was obvious that he kept it in the storage space. Shinjiuli still held the ordinary moonlight sword in his hand. His face was indifferent, just now does not count. You can change to another sword. Yi Tianli. He sighed softly, I only brought these two swords. In other words, he did not have a third sword to use. I'll send you off. Suddenly, a soft shout came from below. A crimson long sword flew up and fell directly into Yi Tianli's hand. The crimson sword was as red as the setting sun. Its name was Sky Splitter, and it was the holy artifact of the Demon Lord. There was no weapon that it couldn't destroy, and no protective barrier that it couldn't destroy. When struck by this sword, even if one's vitals weren't injured, it would still corrode and devour one's soul, causing the soul to wail within the sword spirit. Unless the sword master was merciful and released the souls he had collected, he would suffer the pain of being devoured forever, unable to reincarnate. 3 years ago, on the day of the Devil Lord's rebirth, this sword had automatically sought its master. Aomo had used it to traverse the 6 realms, defeating all opponents under the heavens and establishing her supreme status. Everyone in the immortal world knew about this sword. Naturally, Yi Tianli had heard of it as well. He had even suffered a loss under this sword. He never thought that Aomo would lend him this sword today. The power of this sword was not inferior to the Heavenly Path sword. Because Aomo had personally given this sword to him, this sword was very obedient in Yi Tianli's hands. The crimson light flowed around the sword. It was like the eyes of a young girl, able to steal away a person's soul with just one glance. With this sword in hand, Yi Tianli's courage was boosted. Chapter 1620. He looked at Shinjiuli, but Shinjiuli did not look at him. Shinjiuli's eyes fell on Aomo, who was standing there looking up at him. Both of their eyes met in the air. Shinjiuli's face was slightly pale, but Aomo smiled. Her eyes even had a hint of interest and malice, with a hint of challenge. Shinjiuli looked at her for a moment and finally looked away. He slowly raised his head and looked at Yi Tianli. His eyes, which had some fluctuations just now, had returned to normal. He said faintly, I want to change my sword too. Yi Tianli's heart sank. Originally, he wanted to use the advantage of the Sky Splitter sword to kill Shinjiuli. However, if he wanted to change his sword, he would definitely change to the Heavenly Dao sword. The power of the two swords was almost the same, so he would not be able to gain any advantage in terms of weapons. However, at this time, he had to let him change his sword. Therefore, he paused for a moment and could only pretend to be generous. He smiled and said, of course, you can use the Heavenly Dao sword. Everyone below also opened their eyes wide and waited for Shinjioli to take out the Heavenly Dao sword again. Unexpectedly, after Shinjioli kept the Moonlight sword, he stretched out his palm and directly condensed an ordinary black iron sword in his palm. He faintly added, "I will use this." Yi Tianli was speechless. Everyone was shocked. The black iron sword looked ordinary at first glance. It was not even as good as the Moonlight sword. Mo's long eyelashes drooped down, hiding the color in her eyes. She waved her sleeves behind her, and a quaint chair automatically appeared behind her. She sat on it, propping up her chin with her palm as she lazily looked at everything above her. After a moment, she suddenly seemed to realize something. She turned her head and looked at the spherical wizardry barrier that had been hanging beside her. Inside the wizardry barrier, Shen Yinma's eyes were wide open. He looked at her in disbelief, as if he could not believe that his mother would side with an outsider to go against his father. He pursed his lips, and tears rolled in his eyes. Mo's eyes met his, and his heart trembled slightly. It was as if a sharp needle had pierced into the depths of his heart. She paused for a moment, unwilling to meet his gaze again. With a gentle wave of her sleeve, the originally transparent barrier turned pink and non-transparent. Shen Yinma's tiny figure was finally hidden in the wizardry barrier. She let out a light sigh. It was better not to let such a young child see such a gory scene, in case it stimulated his little heart. She then raised a hand and gently pressed it on the pink enchantment. The pink enchantment shook like a cradle, and her voice was transmitted into the enchantment, "Be good, have a good sleep." The little one was very obedient inside the enchantment. He definitely could not see the outside now, but he did not rush around anxiously. Instead, he sat there motionlessly. Mo could sense his movements at this moment. Seeing that he was indeed obedient, he let out a sigh of relief. The two people above had already started fighting, and the clouds were surging in the sky. The sky splitter was indeed extraordinary. Even if it was not controlled by a person, it could still move freely in the air. Every move it made was earth-shattering. The sky splitter was also a very murderous evil sword. Once it was out of the sheath, no matter who the opponent was, it would exert a great power. Every move was bloodthirsty and deadly. It circled around Shinjioli in a hurry and attacked him as if he was its nemesis. It would only be satisfied after he was killed by the sword. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.